Chapter 573. Only by witnessing it with his own eyes could he understand how shocking the sword move of the strongest swordsman in the world was. The military parade square of Reki City was extremely wide. Within a radius of thousands of meters, the dense broken raindrops, which were like crystal grains, were quietly and strangely suspended in the air. The sword intent extended from the broken raindrops, stretching the crystals one by one. The lights in the square refracted colorful light in the suspended crystal grains. The whole square became hazy and blurred. The soldiers of the Snowdance Corps froze there one after another, looking like dead things. The military parade square had been completely cordoned off. The military of Wulan State blocked the 2 blocks around the square. On the steps around the square, in front of a blurred and dangerous light, Li Tianlan quietly looked at a soldier of the Snowdance Corps who was closest to him. The halo was spreading, the raindrops were breaking, the sword energy was extending, and the danger was spreading. In his sight, the soldier of the Snowdance Corps was very close to him, but everything in front of him became extremely blurred. Vaguely, Li Tianlan could see that the other party's eyes were trying to move. Obviously, this sword move imprisoned his body, but it could not imprison his mind. Li Tianlan's palm moved, and then he fell silent again. How is it? Li Huaqing stood beside Li Tianlan and asked in a gloomy tone. His expression was solemn, but his eyes were extremely cold. When he received the news here, Li Huaqing was still immersed in the joy of signing the contract with Wulan State. As a result, tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were imprisoned by a sword move, and it was the Sword Emperor of Xianxia State who did it. How could such news be blocked? Now, perhaps the whole world knew that the Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong had attacked the Snowdance Corps. Such behavior was tantamount to openly stepping on Li Huaqing's bottom line. No matter how he looked at it, Wang Tianzong had gone too far. Chi-Chi's first appearance, Li Tianlan shook his head and said calmly, "There's no way." In Eastern Europe, there were few times when he was powerless. But in the face of Wang Tianzong's sword move, he really had no way at all. His sword intent was perfect, but he didn't have enough sword energy to support it. Even if there was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm who practiced the same martial arts as him and was willing to lend him his sword energy, Li Tianlan couldn't break this sword. The Wang Tianzong who wielded this sword was completely different from the Wang Tianzong on the night of the trial day. It could almost be said to be at another level. Now that this sword was here, unless Wang Tianzong wanted to withdraw the sword energy or wait for the sword energy to disappear by itself, no one in the entire dark world could do anything to this sword. Li Huaqing slowly turned around and looked at the light curtain flashing with different colors in front of him. The blurred figures of countless soldiers of the Snowdance Corps were constantly shaking in the light curtain. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Li Huaqing could clearly feel their struggle in silence and stiffness. A surge of anger rushed to the top of his head. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and suddenly opened his mouth. His loud and clear voice directly rushed through the broken curtain of rain. "Wang Tianzong, come out." The broken curtain of rain trembled slightly. A drop of rain that had been stretched by the sword chi slowly fell. In the slight sound of footsteps, Wang Tianzong's figure seemed to come out of the rain. He looked at Li Huaqing and then at Li Tianlan without saying anything. Li Tianlan didn't say anything either. There was no Wang Tianzong in front of him. The so-called image was just a stream of sword energy, but it was extremely real. "Tianzong, what's going on?" Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and his voice grew gloomier. "They need to stay here for a few days." Wang Tianzong's tone was calm. He looked straight into Li Huaqing's eyes and didn't give in at all. "What's the reason?" "There's no reason." Li Huaqing's eyes almost narrowed into a line. "No reason?" He nodded and suddenly became furious. "If there's no reason, why do you imprison them here? Do you know that these are the most elite corps of Xianxia State and also the corps that have made great contributions to Xianxia State? Wang Tianzong, what do you want to do? Beihai Province is still a province of Xianxia State. Have you considered their position when you do this?" Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became cold. He nodded and said, "I'm doing this because my position hasn't changed. Mr. President, you're right. They're the most elite corps in Xianxia State. As a Zhongzhou citizen, I have the obligation to protect them. This is the last battle, and they shouldn't be sacrificed in vain in such a battle. I left them here for the survival of the entire Snowdance Corps. The last battle? Li Huaqing paused slightly and said in a low voice, "What do you mean?" Wang Tianzong didn't answer. He glanced at Li Tianlan calmly and said meaningfully, "Tribulation went to Mormons." Li Tianlan's face suddenly changed. At the same time, his cell phone suddenly rang. Li Tianlan took out his cell phone. It was Situ Tsangyue's phone number. Pale lightning flashed across the night sky of Reki City. Li Tianlan answered the phone. In the messy wind and rain, in the rainy season of Eastern Europe, an unprecedented thunder suddenly shook between heaven and earth. In the lightning and thunder, Li Tianlan, who was holding the phone, turned livid in an instant. The thunder gradually passed. The heavy rain poured down. When the rainy season was about to end, an incomparably wild heavy rain swept through all of Eastern Europe. Lightning raged in the air. Li Tianlan silently put down the phone. The image of Wang Tianzong condensed by the sword energy had disappeared. Li Tianlan looked in the direction of Wang Tianzong across the square and was silent for a long time. In the room with the lights on, Wang Tianzong, who was dressed in a wide robe with big sleeves of the Han costume, was also looking in Li Tianlan's direction with a writing brush in his hand. He watched Li Tianlan narrow his eyes, watch him remain silent, and watch him turn around and leave. "Where are you going?" Li Huaqing's voice sounded. Li Tianlan didn't look back and said calmly, "Mormons?" Wang Tianzong laughed. At this moment, he didn't know if Li Tianlan understood, but he had already understood. These were not his plans. At his current height, he no longer needed any plans. Li Tianlan was indeed tricky, but as long as he wanted to, he could solve it in the simplest way. When the Snowdance Corps was imprisoned here, in the vast Eastern Europe, Reki City, Wulan State, there was no young marshal. On the final battlefield, Li Tianlan was just Li Tianlan. That was all. Over the Manor of Mormons, the wind and rain suddenly became heavier. The polar night was getting darker. Inside and outside the manor, the hazy fog seemed to have broken free from its shackles and began to fill every corner. The white fog, which represented rich vitality, flowed slowly and lingered in every flower and leaf in the manor. It gathered and did not disperse, looking beautiful and mysterious. The deep black and white fog of the polar night slowly intertwined. Lin Fengting silently walked in the garden, carefully looking at the grass and trees in front of him. His movements were very slow, and his eyes were focused on every flower in his line of sight. Such a serious posture gave people the feeling that he wasn't looking at the flowers at all, but was looking for something. An old voice sounded behind him, and he was a little confused. "What are you doing, sir?" Behind Lin Fengting, the 13th Supermaster of Samsara Palace, Xianxia, the Metaphysics Grandmaster of Zhongzhou State with the code name Tianji, held an umbrella with a puzzled look in his eyes. He had used a mortal fate to connect Li Tianlan's dragon vein with Qin Weibai, and their vitality was closely connected. Now it was time to have a result, so he naturally had to come and see. But he did not know what Lin Fengting was looking for here at this time. Lin Fengting walked slowly, as if he did not hear Xianxuanzi's voice. Xianxuanzi hesitated for a moment and followed Lin Fengting with an umbrella, carefully observing the white fog condensed by fate around him. The frantic raindrops pattered on the pitch-black surface of the umbrella. The flowers and plants shook, the thunder roared, the lightning flashed, the wind howled, and the rain fell. It was noisy. In a trance, Lin Fengting's very soft and low voice sounded, with trance and unreality. "Master, do you think there will be two flowers that are exactly the same in such a big garden?" Xianxuanzi was stunned for a moment. There would not be two leaves, two flowers, or two people that were exactly the same in the world. He glanced at Lin Fengting and said with a smile, "Maybe there will be similar ones." Lin Fengting's voice was a little persistent. "I mean exactly the same. How is that possible?" Xianxuanzi smiled and shook his head. "I thought it was impossible before, but why is it impossible?" Lin Fengting muttered to himself and shook his head. Xianxuanzi suddenly felt a little uneasy. His eyes focused and looked at Lin Fengting. What do you mean, sir? Boring. Lin Fengting shook his head. These, he pointed to the vast fog ahead. Such strong fate, such strong vitality, who did you give it to? To the boss, of course. Xianxia's tone was indifferent. Lin Fengting laughed. His smile was complicated and absurd. Who is your boss? Xianxia looked at him with even more absurd eyes. He asked, who else can it be except Qin Weibai? Lin Fengting whispered, who else can it be except Qin Weibai? In the wind and rain, he smiled bitterly. But the question is, who is Qin Weibai? In the dark church, in the almost frozen atmosphere, blood was still flowing. The smell of blood seemed to have a strange fragrance, and the smell that represented sin and desire had begun to fade away. The Pope, who was about to leave, walked back step by step. Angel looked at him, and her calm eyes were like ice and snow. What is the new stream? The Pope stared into Angel's eyes and asked seriously, You don't know the new stream? Angel tilted her head and looked at the Pope. Her voice was hoarse with strange emotions. The Pope said nothing. Of course, he knew the new stream. In the traditional sense, the new stream was also a sect that believed in God. In the eyes of ordinary people, there was no difference between the Vatican, the Eastern Church, and the new stream. But because of their different interpretations of the same faith, they were strangers to each other and even regarded each other as heretics. The Vatican was powerful. It was entrenched in Eastern Europe and spread all over the world. The Eastern Church was also deeply rooted in Eastern Europe. The new stream was a force that had only risen in recent years. It had no clear diocese, scattered personnel, and insufficient foundation. It was mainly distributed in Southeast Asia. This kind of sect without foundation was not worthy of the Vatican's attention. But the new stream really had a large number of people, and in the chaotic area of Southeast Asia, it was very easy to cultivate fanatics. So the new stream had developed very fast in recent years and had vaguely become the third force besides the Vatican and the Eastern Church. But at this moment, the Pope was not sure if the Protestantism that Angel was talking about was the Protestantism that she knew. You joined the new stream? The Pope's voice suddenly became extremely cold. I didn't join the new stream. Angel's voice became more and more difficult. I said that before today. I had a clear conscience about the Vatican. The Pope looked at Angel coldly and did not speak. I didn't join it, but it doesn't mean that I haven't been in contact with the new stream. I am the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. The new stream is developing very fast. I very much hope to absorb the new stream, let the new stream accept our ideas, and then become our new diocese. Did you see the Pope of the new stream? The Pope suddenly asked. Angel shook her head. I didn't see the Pope. She smiled. But I saw the Holy Virgin of the new stream, whose status is even higher than the Pope. She said quietly, but the Pope's body suddenly became extremely cold. It was raining heavily. The conversation between Angel and the Pope came to an end. The conversation between Mellad and the mysterious Majesty also came to an end. There was silence at the end. Listening to Angel's encounter, His Majesty did not speak for a long time. Mellad waited quietly. But the longer he waited, the more he felt that something was wrong. You mean that our sis arranged a lot of confidants for Angel? / To be exact, there are 16. Mellad said seriously. That is to say, Angel had 16 men overnight? His Majesty's voice was very cold. Then he sneered. Do you think it's possible? Mellad seriously thought about the situation at that time. From his standpoint, he really wanted to see such a hot scene where the saint warriors insulted the Holy Virgin of the Vatican. Therefore, he paid special attention to this matter. He carefully recalled and confirmed again, that's the truth. Bullshit. His Majesty suddenly scolded angrily. With Angel's character, purity is her bottom line. She only has tribulation in her heart. Tell me, under what circumstances would she let more than 10 men insult her? Mellad was silent for a while and tentatively said, when she can't resist. His Majesty was not amused by his dry humor. He thought slowly and said, it's impossible for Angel to have no room to resist. There's something wrong with this matter. It's impossible, His voice was silent for a while, and he suddenly asked, "How many times has Angel been in contact with the Samsara Palace?" "As far as I know, there was only one time in the Holy Land." Mellad said, "That night, I saw Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting. Angel was also there." His Majesty said, "Did Lin Fengting attack you that night?" Mellad nodded. "You were unscathed?" His Majesty's voice became more and more gloomy. Mellad still nodded. "Lin Fengting is just as a... Although his sword is strong, it's very slow. It's too slow." His Majesty's voice suddenly rose. "It's so slow that you don't know how many things you've missed." He took a few rapid breaths and said coldly, "Didn't you notice the time after it was over? How long did it take for Lin Fengting to attack with that sword? 10 minutes? Or half an hour?" Mellad opened his mouth, but his heart suddenly sank. He didn't know how long it took for Lin Fengting to attack with that sword that night. He didn't know if he had noticed the time. At this moment, he tried hard to recall, and suddenly found that he had no impression of the time that night at all. The wind and rain filled the sky. His Majesty hung up the phone. Under the gloomy polar night, the roar of the engine with a crazy meaning sounded faintly. The bright headlights rushed over like two raging tides and rushed straight to the church. The sky was full of killing. At the same time, the atmosphere in the church hall had completely frozen. The Pope regained his indifference. "Angel," there was a sigh in his voice. Angel suddenly raised her head and looked at him. "My name is Situ." She laughed softly. In an instant, all the Pope could see was Angel's figure. Her figure was so tall, so clear, and so beautiful that it almost occupied the whole world. The Pope was at a loss for a moment and suddenly woke up. This was an absolutely pure spiritual domain. This was the transcendent realm. The Pope suddenly retreated, and his voice became extremely high as he retreated. "Kill her!" The sound of a heavy object falling to the ground rang out without warning. Before Arsis came back to his senses, around him, one after another, the saint warriors who had once insulted Angel with a grim smile had fallen silently. The hall of the church was still extremely dark, but the light was changing slightly. In a trance, Angel, whose limbs were nailed to the cross, was bleeding. But the smell that was full of desire was moving away. Her body was no longer naked. The torn white dress reappeared on her body, extremely clean and tidy. Arisis's eyes widened in disbelief. Was everything just an illusion? How was it possible? Angel, who was wearing a white dress and bleeding, slowly opened her eyes. She looked at Arsis, and there was undisguised arrogance in her tone. "I said that you are a clown, and I have the will and spirit that you lack the most. How dare you insult me?" Arisis's huge body suddenly trembled. Extreme anger swallowed all his reason in an instant. The whole night, all the scenes, the cruel revenge, the desperate struggles and wailing, were all the scenes he had imagined. Now Angel's dress was neat and tidy. When the illusion disappeared, she was so arrogant. Arisis's fingers kept trembling. Angel glanced at Arsis coldly. Arisis's face was angry and resentful. In Angel's spiritual domain, he didn't feel anything strange, but Angel spat out a mouthful of blood directly. At the same time, the Pope's aura also quickly weakened. The Pope's figure began to retreat quickly in the darkness, but his order did not change. "Arsis, kill her!" Angel laughed. Outside the church, the wild and galloping vehicle crashed into the church. In the polar night sky, there was a fire burning in the continuous heavy rain. Angel's body straightened up and she said calmly, "Everything you did tonight is blasphemy. You are guilty." Chapter 574. The Pope quickly stepped back. He had been standing on the altar all his life, controlling people's hearts, and his words were law. It could be said that he was extremely brilliant. But at this moment he felt an unprecedented danger. Danger. This was a feeling that the Pope had almost forgotten. From the above-board political circles of various countries to the dark and bloody dark world, he was ambitious, bold, invincible, and domineering. But he never felt that anyone could threaten him. He really didn't understand martial arts, not at all. But in the spiritual field, he was truly invincible, and no one could kill him. But at this moment, the omen of death was so clear. It was like a dark shadow was crazily spreading over. The surrounding space was collapsing and the earth was cracking. Stars were falling and light was disappearing. Deathly silence and coldness spread over with an almost eternal darkness, swallowing everything like an abyss. Countless scenes kept changing in front of him, and finally returned to reality. The reality was Angel's eyes, so beautiful that they occupied everything. The transcendent realm. At this moment, the Pope could finally be completely convinced that in his invincible spiritual field, there was now an opponent who could compete with him. The traitor of the Vatican, the Holy Virgin Angel, had also entered the transcendent realm. How was this possible? The Pope only felt that everything that had happened today was extremely absurd. Everything that Angel had experienced, all the insults, and the sinful desires, were all illusions. But when he was unprepared, even he was deceived. A faintly discernible sense of panic gradually took over his consciousness. The Pope's retreating figure suddenly stopped. In an instant, his pupils condensed and shrank, and there was a pure and flawless silvery white color between his eyes. This was the most powerful and perfect will in the entire dark world. It was like a vast galaxy, like a surging sea. With a huge oppressive will, it followed the Pope's gaze and went straight into Angel's eyes. It was irresistible. "Arcis, kill her." The Pope's deep voice sounded, incomparably majestic. Angel was motionless, but her spirit was more active than ever. The Pope's eyes were silvery white, and his eyes were shining. The clear softness in Angel's eyes gradually faded, became dark, and became silent. The two of them looked at each other. The same perfect will instantly met. At that moment, the Pope did not feel any ordinary emotion in Angel's will. It was darkness, deathly silence, coldness, numbness, madness, and incomparable despair. The Pope suddenly opened his eyes wide. In this darkness, he finally saw the truth. He knew Angel's mental state very well. With her temperament, it was impossible for her to enter the transcendent realm for the rest of her life. Even at her peak, there was still a long way to go before she could enter the transcendent realm. After encountering tribulation, her mental state had been unstable. It was already good enough that she had not regressed. It was impossible for her to continue to improve. From saintess to rebellion, to being purified, all the experiences might stimulate Angel's will, but it was impossible for her to break through to this level. There was no traditional realm in the spiritual domain. The transcendent realm was the only realm. There was a natural moat between this realm and the upper and lower realms. It was even more exaggerated than martial arts. To some extent, Angel had no room for improvement. But at this time, the willpower and spirit displayed by Angel were indeed in the transcendent realm. That vast yet incomparably condensed will was so dark, so despairing. This was not Angel's state of mind at all. Naturally, it was not Angel's will. The darkness was like a tide. With a madness and malice that almost buried the entire era, it swallowed the Pope in an instant. The whole church was completely boiling in the silent wind and rain. Like a mad bull, a vehicle soared into the air and crashed into the front door of the church. The harsh alarm and the angry roar sounded at the same time. The polar night was silent. The heavy rain fell. The fierce wind all over the sky stopped for a moment. A figure that was not very tall appeared in the air like a shadow. He raised a palm. All the airflow around him stopped in an instant. As the most elite force of the Holy Disarmament Corps, countless saint warriors reacted immediately. A saint warrior in heavy armor, who was obviously ready for battle in advance, suddenly rose into the air and shouted, "Who is it?" The stagnant ice wind shook slightly. In the silence, the body of the saint warrior who had rushed into the sky shattered silently. At this moment, it seemed that countless sharp blades had split his body. The broken pieces of flesh and blood spilled down and fell to the ground with a dull sound. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. This picture was so clear and cruel that the Holy Disarmament Corps, which was full of fighting intent, was silent for a moment. Everyone stared at the thin figure in the air, who was not tall and could even be said to be slightly short. Black tights and silver mask. He stood there without any emotion that a human should have. In a trance, he was like a knife, sharp enough to split everything. After a moment of silence, the figure standing in the air seemed to glance at the holy disarmament core below. A hoarse and deep voice sounded, with extreme indifference. Zhongzhou State, Situ Wanjie. Where's ours? Countless curses filled with anger and murderous intent suddenly rang out. How dare you! Heresy, kill him. He should be purified. Guilty. This is blasphemy. Damn it. Amidst countless curses and roars, Tribulation stared ahead quietly. It was raining cats and dogs. In the deep night, it took him several hours to drive across a distance of nearly 1,000 miles. Tribulation's body was a little tired, but his whole soul was burning. He didn't flinch or hesitate. In the air, he took a step forward and whispered, "I'm here to pick you up." The stagnant night wind began to surge as he moved forward. Between heaven and earth, the gale from all directions continued to gather around Tribulation's body. He moved forward slowly. Countless of the most elite saint warriors around rushed forward without hesitation. The violent airflow had formed a visible tornado around Tribulation. The space was constantly shaking because of the hurricane. Tribulation glanced down. There was no emotion in his eyes. The gale burst. The wind, which had been condensed to the extreme, burst like a knife, and kept flying with the chilling, killing intent. The shrill sound of the wind kept reverberating, getting louder and louder. The airflow that kept exploding came in wisps, and each wisp carried a fatal edge. Between heaven and earth, the killing intent soared to the sky. In the corner of the church, Mellad had already stood up. Tribulation's figures slowly moved forward in the air. Countless saint warriors rose into the air and then fell. Blood, broken limbs, and minced flesh spread all the way with death. How is it possible? Mellad's eyes were extremely solemn. How can he be so strong? At this moment, in his eyes, Tribulation was the incarnation of death. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, Mellad could roughly see Tribulation's current state. Tribulation was not in a good state. His injury had not healed. At this moment, every time he moved with all his strength, his body might completely collapse. Moreover, his breakthrough was too fierce, so it was not perfect. Obviously, he had not solved this problem in the past few years. But it was more obvious that Tribulation had obviously stopped thinking about it. If he couldn't solve the problem, he wouldn't solve it. Now, Tribulation no longer considered any consequences. There was only killing in his heart. Mellad's body trembled slightly, and there was obvious hesitation and struggle in his eyes. In this state, Tribulation would definitely not be able to withstand one attack from him. Mellad was sure that as long as he appeared in front of him, he could beat Tribulation into a bloody mess with just one punch. Not to mention him, any ordinary Invincible Realm expert, even a half-step Invincible Realm expert, or even a peak of the Thundershocking Realm expert could kill Tribulation with a full blow. But similarly, any Invincible Realm expert, close to the peak of the Invincible Realm, or even at the peak of the Invincible Realm, would not be able to withstand a blow from Tribulation. In this state, anyone was qualified to bet life and death with Tribulation, but he was also qualified to bet life and death with anyone. His body was extremely fragile, but at this moment, the sharpness he showed had far exceeded that of an ordinary Invincible Realm expert. Instead, he had steadily entered the peak of the Invincible Realm. This was Tribulation in his normal state. There were no injuries or hidden dangers. As the strongest assassin in the dark world, this was his own sharpness. I told you, don't underestimate Tribulation. His Majesty's voice sounded in the phone, extremely low. And why do you look down on him? What's the concept of breaking the existing martial arts and entering the Invincible Realm when he is in the Chi-controlling realm? This proves that since the 4 realms of martial arts, his Chi-controlling realm is the most perfect. In terms of the Chi-controlling realm alone, he is even more perfect than the Chosen One. Who dares to look down on such a monster? His breakthrough is so fierce that he can't exert all his strength at all. But if he doesn't care about anything, who can stop him in front of us? This is a peak assassin who can gamble with the life and death of an expert in the peak of the invincible realm. His Majesty's voice was a little emotional. The Vatican is finished. Mellad hesitated for a moment. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Stop him. His Majesty's voice suddenly became extremely cold. At least hold him back. Angel must die. I can't hold him back. Mellad smiled bitterly without hesitation. It was easy to kill such a tribulation, and it was also easy to be killed by him. But it was not easy to hold him back. It was as difficult as ascending to heaven. The will that represented the darkness surged wildly. Time was going back in a hurry. Angel looked at the Pope in front of her. In a trance, she seemed to have returned to the Holy Land more than a month ago, to that night in the hotel in the Holy Land. In the hotel room, Mellad stood beside her. In front of them were Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting. The hidden patriarch of the Lin clan began to draw his sword. The sharpness of the sword was so strong that everyone ignored everything else. The memory that seemed to have been sealed and deliberately forgotten appeared in her mind, becoming clearer and clearer. A voice sounded in her ear. Are you Tribulation's woman? Angel was shocked. In the room, Lin Fengting's sword was still moving forward. Its sharpness was at its peak, but its speed was getting slower and slower. Everything was like a completely frozen oil painting. Only her thoughts were still normal. "Or you?" She looked at Qin Weibai and asked with vigilance in her eyes. "I'm Qin Weibai." Qin Weibai said something nonsense. Angel became more and more vigilant. She was a little uneasy and subconsciously wanted to retreat. "You should see this." Qin Weibai stretched out her palm. Suddenly, the whole world compressed toward her as she raised her palm. The surroundings were getting smaller, and the world was getting smaller. The room was constantly shrinking, completely imprisoning her in place. The opponent's will was extremely tyrannical, suppressing her in place. A hazy light appeared in Qin Weibai's palm. The light was dense and colorful, like a dream. Angel desperately wanted to look away, but her body was out of control. Her eyes were fixed on the light in front of her. The light flowed slowly, like the joys and sorrows of partings and reunions, flashing one scene after another. It was like the secular world, containing the epitome of an era, and also like martial arts. There was sword chi roaring and growing. The 6 paths of reincarnation broke out to the extreme and destroyed everything. The 10 skills of true martial arts blocked all directions, leaving no grass in the unique domain. The 24 moves of sword shattered the sky and tore the world apart. The starry sky was vast, and the shadows were flowing. Ice, wind, thunder, and fire were constantly changing. This was everything. What she wanted to see, she could see in it. Angel was extremely scared, as if she had seen the legendary Pandora's box. She knew what it meant. This was the embodiment of a strong will that was infinitely close to the extreme. The transcendent realm. In front of this light, her thoughts were extremely vague, but also extremely clear. Are you in the transcendent realm? Not yet. Qin Weibai stared at the light in her palm, and she was also in a daze. No one knew what she saw in this light. But it's very close. What do you want? Angel stepped back in vain, and her voice was gradually changing because of fear. I want to lend it to you for a while. Qin Weibai said faintly. I don't want this kind of thing. Angel almost screamed. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. It's very likely to save your life. It's not a bad thing for you. Qin Weibai smiled gently and softly. What the hell is this? Angel asked in a trembling voice. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time, and then she whispered, This is a sword light. The epitome in the sword light is an era that belongs to women, an era of revenge, the most boring era. All the memories began to become clearer and clearer. Angel thought of every expression of Qin Weibai at that time. At that time, she saw the light expanding in the other party's palm. The light was getting brighter and brighter, but she could only feel darkness. That was endless despair. The will belonging to the Pope rushed into her spiritual domain with great arrogance and determination. The Pope's pupils were contracting, but Angel's pupils were expanding. The sword light that condensed the entire era shone in her eyes. It was so fierce and so lonely. Vaguely, she remembered that she asked again at that time, "What the hell is this?" Qin Weibai's answer seemed equally clear at this time. The Heart of Despair. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 575. The most gorgeous light spread in her consciousness with the purest darkness. The light in Angel's pupils faded away quickly, becoming dimmer and dimmer. However, the sword light named Despair Heart continued to soar in her sight. Her spiritual realm and the sword light merged into one, completely stabilizing in the transcendent realm. Countless pictures kept flowing. Vitality slowly passed in Angel's body. The Pope's body began to tremble obviously. The colorful sword light appeared in his consciousness with countless pictures without warning. The pictures began to flash quickly, like a dream. Someone set off a gust of wind in the depressed deep sea. Someone gathered rainwater in the dry desert. Someone flicked his fingers and lit fire in the ice and snow, evaporating the glacier. Thunder rose between day and night, and the power of heaven fell. Someone climbed to the sky and reached the clouds. In the brightly lit city, thousands of people bowed their heads. Under the attention of the whole world, someone took over the divine sword. The tide slapped against the cliff. In front of the boulder engraved with names, someone was saying something to him. In the tide that sounded like thunder, he looked into the distance. The afterglow of the setting sun shone down, and the quiet and free couple was walking away. In the attic in the ice and snow, the girl was practicing one movement after another. The serious-looking woman corrected her every expression harshly. Smiling, raising her hand, walking steps, and swinging her waist. A golden dog appeared in the solemn and quiet airport. The heaven and earth suddenly shattered into a fist and fell down. He walked into the spacious and solemn conference room. The giant standing at the peak of power stood up at the same time. He waved his hand casually and sat down directly opposite the main seat. At the grand military parade, the most elite troops shouted, "Invincible," with fanatical expressions. One after another, the Invincible Realm experts who were powerful in the dark world bent down in embarrassment. He appeared in one picture after another. The solemn meeting, the warm banquet, and the fierce battle. The prosperous, the barren, the mountains, the rivers, the lakes, the seas, and the bustling cities in the human world. He walked over naturally, and everything was under his feet. The sword energy flowing with colorful light shone the night sky. After the sword light, the world was vast. There was heavy snow in front of the Pope. The wind and snow were messy, and countless drops of blood fell. Tens of thousands of images erupted at the same time, almost shattering all of his consciousness. The colorful sword light whistled in the wind and snow. The murderous weapon opened fire at all costs. The bright sword light pierced forward with an incomparably decisive killing intent. In the bustling city, at the highest place, a beauty in a red dress lightly jumped down. The sword intent, which seemed to be infinite reincarnation and also seemed to be exploding to the limit, filled the sky, and the colorful sword light was burning. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. Facing everything, he advanced courageously in the sky full of starlight. The black waves swept up to the sky, and the huge stone engraved with glory shattered. The figure fell powerlessly into the deep sea, and the perfect figure fell from the sky. Flowers withered, trees were crushed, and the water was turbid. On the other side of the barren mountain where all the palaces had collapsed, a warm hand held a boy's hand as they walked through the wind and snow. His figure was elegant, but his voice was a little lonely. "Grandpa Lin, I want revenge." "What hatred?" "From today onwards, it was all over. They've repaid what they owed you." Ah. The Pope suddenly hugged his head with both hands and roared. 2 lines of blood shot out from his eyes. His face was twisted and pale. Countless images continued to appear in his consciousness. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of them. The cherry blossoms of North Island, Tribulation and Angel, who were still young, appeared in his consciousness. Countless people's lives and endings flooded into his mind like a tide, and finally turned into a flame, burning his will, faith, and even soul. The vitality in Angel's eyes was getting fainter and fainter. The Pope struggled to raise his hand. In front of Angel, Arcis held a slender samurai sword and directly pierced Angel's chest. All of Angel's vitality began to break under this sword. There was no future anymore. This was real despair. She closed her eyes, and all her will began to burn like never before, as if she was going to destroy everything. A mouthful of blood sprayed directly from the Pope's mouth. His aura quickly weakened, and even his raised palm began to tremble violently. He gasped hard, and his voice was rapid and hoarse. "Purify, purify this heretic." The wind and rain were like knives. Outside the church, it was completely a hell-like charaba. Tribulation's figure moved straight forward in the air. One shadow after another began to condense around him. He was walking, and so was the shadow. The extremely cold and cruel killing intent was surging and boiling like a raging tide. Countless people in the Saint Warriors stepped on the air and flew up. Tribulation was moving. The shadow was also moving. The shadow, which perfectly replicated all of Tribulation's movements, was a machine specially designed for killing and survival. The strong wind and heavy rain rotated around the shadow, as cold as a blade. The raging fire went out. The thunder disappeared. The thick ice wall turned into powder in an instant. Blood flowed down. The broken bodies and pieces of flesh kept splashing. Tribulation's face was expressionless. It seemed that he had never been like this in his life. He moved forward seriously, killed, and was so focused. "Everyone, this chapter is not over. Please turn the page." In front of him, they were both non-entities and opponents. Ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm, peak of thunder-shocking realm, and even half-step invincible realm. Tribulation went all out to deal with every opponent. One blow. Only one blow. No matter who stood in front of him, he was turned into flying pieces. Flesh and blood. It was calm, but it moved forward with indomitable will. More and more Saint Warriors gathered, but fewer and fewer of them attacked. The Saint Warriors began to retreat. And Melad's figure finally walked over from the corner of the church with difficulty. Before today, Melad had never thought that he would be afraid of anyone. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he would not be afraid of any battle under any circumstances. After all, even if he was not an opponent, he could leave the battlefield calmly. But at this moment, in the face of tribulation, although he did not want to admit it, he had to face the fear in his heart. This fear was so strong that every step he took was incomparably difficult. This was the opponent that Melad was most unwilling to face. Such a tribulation. In front of him, this was not a battle at all. It was a gamble with his life. His Majesty asked him to hold the other party back. But he couldn't hold him back at all. No one could stop tribulation in this state. Such a battle was really a moment of life and death. Bang! There seemed to be something breaking in the church in front of him. An incomparably weak but extremely sharp voice rang out. It was Angel's voice. "You will all be buried with me." In midair, Tribulation suddenly raised his head. The shadows around him raised their heads at the same time. The wind and rain paused slightly in the air. The sharpness that was enough to tear the night sky suddenly burst out. Tribulation reached out his hand, and the shadows around him made their moves at the same time. The wind and rain hovering in front of him gathered together at the moment he made his move. With a push of his hand, it turned into a hazy arc of light. The water rippled. The next second, blood bloomed. Melad suddenly gritted his teeth. His body rushed up into the sky with countless residual shadows. Like a bolt of lightning, he pounced on Tribulation. The moment when it seemed to become extremely fast and then extremely slow, Tribulation glanced at him. His eyes were extremely calm, without any emotion or life or death. He put his palm up. The black shadows around him dissipated. A sharp sword chime filled with killing intent suddenly sounded between heaven and earth, with the vast heaven and earth as the sheath, with the wind and rain all over the sky as the sword. Without dodging, Tribulation stared at Mellad. His arm fell, and he directly slashed with his sword. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 576. There was no feeling that could describe this sword. Tribulation raised his arm, and wind and rain gathered silently. A sword with water light was unsheathed between heaven and earth. Before the sword intent was released, a fierce murderous aura had already rushed toward him. The sword formed by raindrops burst out with an incomparably bright light in an instant. The sword light leaped out of Tribulation's hand. Without a sound or presence. All the space in front of Tribulation was completely distorted, and then it was torn apart by this sword. The silent void spread straight with the sword light, moving forward. Countless afterimages completely merged with Melad's real body. The darkness swallowed him up, and the sword light followed. His figure was swallowed up by the void, and all his punches in the air were smashed into the void. The soundless punch suddenly roared in the silent nothingness. Melad's eyes were focused and solemn. His body kept shaking in the void, and the shadow of his fists with endless power instantly covered every inch of the darkness. A light shone in the silent and dark void. A hazy and cold clear light spread out crazily with his continuous punches, like stars. Starlight appeared in the silent void. The starlight shone, mysterious and vast. Charge. Without the slightest hesitation, Melad's figure directly began to charge at full speed. It was as if endless starlight had filled the night in an instant. The dark void was torn into pieces. The distance between the two sides suddenly narrowed. The sword light, which was composed of water light, was not fast, but it could not be avoided at all. It flew over and collided with a hazy group of stars. Melad's body suddenly stiffened in the air, and his expression became a little strange. Tribulation continued to move forward without stopping. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The sound of the rain was silent. The sound of the wind suddenly became chaotic. In the night, as far as the eye could see, the air began to fluctuate wildly like a tide, and ripples appeared in the void and transparent space. The incomparably small sword with water light quietly entered the starry sky around Mellad. That was the starting point of all the fluctuations. The hazy starlight began to extinguish as the rain swords advanced. The stars shattered and fell under the sword light. The small swords filled with water began to disintegrate in the starlight domain around Mellad. The water droplets fell into nothingness, but they created a mighty sound wave. In the domain where the starlight had been extinguished, a raging tide rose up. The surroundings were silent. All the wind and rain in the world instantly formed a line and pierced straight into Melad's domain. The sword light, which was like water ripples, kept flying and diffusing, replacing the starry sky domain around Mellad little by little. The continuous wind and rain were like a torrent, drowning everything in an instant. The sword light connected by the rain was still condensing. The completely dim starry sky domain directly exploded. With a loud bang, all the buildings in the church collapsed. Smoke and dust filled the air in the wind and rain. Blood spurted out, and Melad's figure shook violently. The string of sword light connected by the rainwater had become so thin that there was only a line left. The incomparably thin and weak sword light penetrated his body from the chest. Melad's entire body was blown away by the sharp and heavy force. In the air, his body was already full of blood lines. His body fell to the ground and slid for dozens of meters on the muddy ground before he struggled to stand up. Covered in blood, he didn't even have time to look at the battlefield anymore. Without hesitation, he turned around and fled. One sword strike. With just one sword strike, he directly injured Mellad, who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. Tribulation's aura didn't weaken at all. Instead, it became stronger and stronger. Tribulation, who was completely reckless, might have the weakest body among the invincible realm experts at this time, but in terms of attack power, He could almost be the best in the world. Tribulation continued to move forward. In front of the collapsed main hall of the church, smoke and dust were flying all over the sky. The rain fell again. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. In Tribulation's sight, there seemed to be a white robe staggering away. A fire lit up in the church in front of him. A huge cross rose into the sky. The blood-stained white dress swayed in the wind and rain, but the blazing white flame was burning in the wind and rain. The flame swayed in the void, gradually went up, and swallowed Angel's body little by little. Arsis took Angel's body and flew higher and higher. His loud voice was accompanied by an incomparably strong and violent aura that swept through heaven and earth, majestic and indifferent. Heretics, you will all die here. Tribulation raised his head and looked at the raging fire burning in the air. Without hesitation, he strode forward. The raging fire hit Angel's figure, but her voice resounded through the night sky in an instant. The flames burned her body, but her voice was still calm and soft, with the solemnity and holiness of a chant, mighty and mighty. You all have selfish desires and have betrayed the Lord's way. In the future, you will definitely bear the fruit of sin. Deity's figure rushed through the ruins. The loud noise was still roaring. A large number of church buildings were collapsing and shaking. Several black shadows lined up straight in front of him. Tribulation's movements were getting faster and faster. A red radiance lit up without any warning. The figures in his sight were gathering rapidly. Silent, swift, fierce, and disregarding life and death. A large number of ruins rose into the sky. Under the ruins, a figure covered in a black cloak suddenly rose. The raging fire was burning in his hand. All the nearby metal was refined into an iron rod in the shortest time possible. The iron rod broke through the air and smashed down on Tribulation's head. Another wave of red light shone. The two red lights merged into one, and a domain with a strong sense of confinement rose out of thin air. More and more figures began to appear. He took a step forward. At this moment, Tribulation's movements had been extremely simple. The iron rod that shook the space was directly held by him with one hand. The metal began to melt and turn into molten iron. Before the molten iron fell to the ground, the storm-like attacks had directly fallen on the other party. The other party had no weapon in his hand, but there was no hesitation or defense in his every move. Tribulation was attacking. The other party was also attacking. The Lord is merciful, but he can't forgive your sins, because you have lost your way. The crazy attacks broke out to the limit in an instant. Tribulation didn't stop at all and kept moving forward. But the violent attacks didn't tear the other party's body. When the attacks hit the other party's body, there was a fierce sound of metal colliding. Flesh and blood splashed out. His body was deformed, like a piece of flesh and blood supported by a large amount of metal, extremely ferocious and ferocious. Charge, charge, charge. Tribulation's front, back, left, and right constantly rushed up without any disguise. Everyone's body was constantly changing. You should pray and get inner peace. Even if the Lord is not listening, you can refuse the temptation of the devil. Bang! A loud roar suddenly sounded. Tribulation slowed down. The sharp aura on his body instantly became extremely heavy, as if it was in harmony with heaven and earth. Several black shadows merged with his real body. Tribulation's momentum continued to soar. In front of him, the skeleton that had been transformed by metal was getting taller and taller. Tribulation took a step and waved his fist. The space was completely broken in an instant. The fire lit up. The huge metal skeleton was completely shattered in one punch. The explosion with strong destructive power swallowed Tribulation's figure. The roar almost shook the whole city. There was a rapid and strong heartbeat in the aftermath of the explosion. Please turn the page if this chapter is not over. The thin and short black figure with a silver mask was like death walking out of the fire. The killing intent that seemed to be real rushed out with a strong sense of death. Another punch. The explosion sounded without any suspense. In the huge explosion, Tribulation's body shook. Tiny metal fragments had penetrated his body. Blood kept flowing, But Tribulation's momentum did not decline at all. His aura was still rising, as if it would never end. You stare at hell, and hell stares at you. The domain with red light began to shrink slowly. In the domain, the figure kept changing, becoming taller and taller. The figure became more and more ferocious and approached without hesitation. There was finally a flash of mockery in Tribulation's eyes. A super soldier of this level, with this degree of transformation, this degree of defense and attack, was qualified to cause some trouble to an invincible realm expert alone, not to mention in a group. There were super troops that had been transformed by themselves all over the world, but few could reach this level. This was almost the limit of the current scientific transformation of the human body, and it was also the strongest level. The strongest level could only come from the strongest country. Crack! The sound of bones breaking rang out. In his sight, the elbows of the remaining black-robed soldiers suddenly bent backward to the limit. The black muzzles stuck out from their elbows, and their bodies gradually burned with flames. Violent gunshots rang out. With the most penetrating special bullets, the scorching temperature directly shot out from their eyes, turning into lasers that could burn everything. Zhongzhou State, the Terracotta Army. Tribulation laughed. There was no warmth in his eyes, and his low and hoarse laughter carried the most violent killing intent. One after another, pitch-black shadows appeared beside him. Bullets flew wildly. Scarlet and dazzling lasers. A domain that was close to absolute confinement. Such tacit cooperation. Such a terracotta army was not a temporary elite at all. It was a complete terracotta army, a complete team. Azure Dragon would not appear here. Black Tortoise would not appear here. Vermilion Bird would not either. It was self-evident which team the terracotta army in front of him belonged to. Those who blaspheme will not be forgiven, nor will they live forever, nor will they enter the divine kingdom. Tribulation's hands began to make mudra. Beside him, shadows began to form hand seals one after another. The straight lasers instantly broke into countless pieces and flew everywhere. The bullets in the air exploded in the air, and cracks appeared in the red domain. The large ruins under his feet began to tremble, and the fierce wind rose. With Tribulation as the center, heaven and earth within a radius of tens of meters became completely chaotic in an instant. All-embracing collection. Tribulation's palm made the last mudra. His body glowed. Angel's calm voice continued to ring, like the end. The Lord has sent a messenger. The sinner will fall to hell forever. The light burst out. The shadows around Tribulation were blown by the strong wind. The strong wind disappeared. An incomparably gentle stream of air blew past him. Tribulation's eyes were dead and empty. A whole group of terracotta army was still charging forward. As the wind blew, their bodies began to disappear, turning into the finest powder, swirling in the air. In front, the blazing white fire had completely swallowed Angel. Arsis stood high in the sky and looked down at him, his face full of rage. Tribulation glanced at him, stepped forward and whispered, "I'm here to pick you up." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 577. The wind and rain howled. The pale lightning was still flickering in the air. With the church as the center, people in the whole block near Mormons were running and gathering. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, the Vatican had made the largest investment in the dark world in recent years. Nearly 2,000 saint warriors had gathered in Eastern Europe. Under the leadership of Arsis, this was a force that was enough to make the dark world tremble. At this time, this force had been concentrated in Mormons. In the mournful wind and rain, nearly 2,000 people charged in the direction of the church at the same time. The whole church had completely collapsed. The saint warriors stationed in the church suffered heavy casualties. Mellad fled with serious injuries. The Terracotta Army, which had appeared here under the impetus of countless conspiracies, was completely annihilated. The wind and rain were messy and erratic. Above the church, the blazing white flame burned and danced in the wind and rain. It seemed to be the most holy and pure color in the whole night sky. The flame completely wrapped Angel and was getting closer and closer. Her white dress began to deform slightly in the flame, straightened, and finally became hot. The hem of the dress began to burn. This time, Tribulation and Angel were no longer separated by tens of thousands of miles. They were no longer separated by a vast sea of mountains. There was no faith between them that prevented them from holding hands. What stood in front of them was no longer the world that had been cruelly cut off. Instead, there was only Arsis and this ball of fire. Crack! Tribulation moved straight forward. Dense sounds came out of his body, like the sound of bones breaking. He killed the Holy Disarmament Corps, seriously injured Mellad, and destroyed the Terracotta Army. At this time, his whole aura had become completely violent and had climbed to a peak that he had never reached in his life. The sound of bones vibrating became clearer and more intense. No one could see Tribulation's expression. Under the mask, his eyes gradually twisted and became dangerous and ferocious. "You deserve to die." His deep and hoarse voice sounded like the will of heaven and earth. "I told you you're all going to die here." Arisis's aura had been rising. The medicine that Mellad had given him had been fully exerted in his body at this time. The domain belonging to the peak of the invincible realm continued to gather around him, and finally turned into a miniature domain with a radius of only a few meters. The domain, which was condensed to the extreme, firmly imprisoned Angel's body in the air. There was a void inside the domain, and only the white flame was constantly burning. "Heresy!" Arsis grinned hideously. His voice shook at the same time as the thunder in the sky, almost resounding throughout Mormons. "You seduced the Holy Virgin. This is your punishment." A thick palm that symbolized absolute power was raised. Tribulation's figure began to sprint. "Go to hell." With a loud and vast voice, Arisis's palm began to fall. The distance was neither too far nor too short, and it was almost a straight line. In an instant, the domain around Arsis began to shatter. A black shadow appeared beside Angel. Tribulation was sprinting, and so was the black shadow. The black shadow cut directly into the white flame beside Angel and opened his hands. Tribulation took a step forward. It would only take 1 second, no, only half a second for his real body to swap places with the shadow and appear next to Angel. Half a second. Time passed so quickly, and the distance was so short. Buzz. An ear-piercing sound wave suddenly swept across the void. To ordinary people, this sharp sound would only be a fleeting sound. However, in the ears of experts who were absolutely focused in battle, it was a sharp sound. If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. It was like a steel needle piercing directly into the ear. The domain around Arsis was completely shattered by Tribulation's sudden advance. But before Tribulation had time to change his position, a new domain had appeared beside him again. This was not a man-made domain, but the power of science and technology. Strictly speaking, it was a magnetic field. The huge magnetic field enveloped Tribulation without warning, because the extremely strange suction came from all directions and acted on Tribulation's body in an instant. Tribulation, whose attack power was the best in the world but whose body was already extremely fragile, suddenly deformed in the huge suction. Countless bones were dislocated in his body, and blood flowed from every part of his body. There was no time to react. As soon as the magnetic field appeared, Tribulation was seriously injured. In a very short period of time, all that was left in front of Tribulation was the silver disc that suddenly appeared in front of him and was spinning wildly. The silver disc was extremely three-dimensional, less than 1 meter long. As it rotated at an extremely high speed, all the wind and rain around it were repelled by it. The pure magnetic field completely acted on Tribulation's body, making his footsteps that were about to step out completely stiff. Anyone who had a certain status in the dark world or knew Xianxia state very well would not be unfamiliar with the disc in front of them. This was a luxury that the whole dark world dreamed of, and its status was even second only to murderous weapons. This was the combination of cutting-edge materials and cutting-edge technology. The so-called disc had a name that was famous in the dark world. Four Spirits Armor of Xianxia State, White Tiger Armor. It was different from the silent concealment and camouflage of the Azure Dragon Armor. It was also different from the exaggerated penetration and lethality when the vermilion bird armor transformed into the string of a rainstorm. The white tiger armor was also a piece of clothing, but this disc was its real fighting posture. Its greatest function was the magnetic field in front of it, which was absolute confinement and suppression. The white tiger armor imitated the domain of the invincible realm. For any expert below the invincible realm, it was a nightmare. Tribulation's current combat capability was at the peak of the invincible realm, but his body was not even as good as an ordinary half-step invincible realm expert. His extremely fragile body directly suffered unprecedented damage in the magnetic field that suddenly appeared. General Shang of 9 Serenities in Zhongzhou State. 2 disciples. His Majesty, who had been hiding in the dark, finally showed his fangs again. Compared to Mellat, the magnetic field of the white tiger armor was the most fatal killing move for Tribulation in this state. The magnetic field couldn't kill Tribulation, but it slowed down Tribulation's body for a moment. Everything in the world often had 2 results in an instant. Tribulation didn't change his position with the black shadow. His body suddenly fell down in a violent and dense crisp sound. Arisis's palm fell on Angel's head. Absolute power, a full blow. Get out. Ah. No. Under the wind and rain, a wail like that of a wild beast that had completely lost its mind suddenly sounded. The majestic and fierce voice of General Abysmal kept ringing for a moment. Situ Wanjia, do you know that Zhongzhou State has? Get out. Tribulation's falling body suddenly stopped. Thick darkness spread out. In an instant, there were black shadows everywhere under the night sky. Countless black shadows filled the magnetic field, and the huge darkness suddenly covered the disk. Bang! The incomparably strong white tiger armor suddenly shattered. General Abysmal's old and stunned face appeared for a moment. Tribulation's body rushed over. Shang's figure suddenly disappeared on the spot. Countless blood, pieces of flesh, broken bones, hair, and brains fell from the sky. The darkness was whistling. Blazing white fire. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. The flames were burning fiercely. Under the huge force, Angel's body suddenly fell. The flames around her suddenly surged, extremely fierce. The custom-made white dress turned into dust. Angel's body began to disappear in the flames, bit by bit. Bright and dim between life and death. The blazing white flame dimmed for a moment. Angel, with a ferocious knife wound on her face, glanced at Tribulation in a trance. Thousands of words, deep feelings, vows of undying love, and unswerving love were so small in the face of death. But Angel's final will rushed out at the moment of life and death. Their eyes met in the moment of life and death. The surrounding heaven and earth instantly changed color. The darkness began to disappear gradually. The wind and rain stopped. The sun appeared in the polar night, and the whistling cold wind began to warm up. The flat and soft ground extended forward, and at the end was a sea. The sea was vast, and the mountain vaguely appeared in the line between the sky and the sea. The sun of the North Island jumped under the cherry blossom tree, and the cherry blossom petals flew in the air, danced, and fell. A young and inexperienced yet incredibly pure girl walked toward her. Are you from the North Island? Oh, Zhongzhou State. I haven't been there yet. My name is Ariel from Italos. You like cherry blossoms too? You can take me with you. Can we really meet again? I'm sorry, countless cherry blossoms fluttered and almost covered the whole sky. The holy girl got closer and closer. Her voice sounded as if it was far away. Take me away. Tribulation stood quietly in this world. He watched her figure approach him, open her hands, and then gradually melt. With a fragrance, she melted in his arms. The world began to dim. The ocean was roaring. The warmth gradually became cold. Darkness came. The wind and rain gradually subsided. But the cherry blossoms all over the sky were still fluttering. Tribulation raised his head in a daze. In front of him was Arisis, who was exuding monstrous killing intent. Shang's broken body fell. There was a cherry blossom tree beside him. Reality and illusion began to converge at one point. The silver-white flame in the air had begun to dissipate. Angel had disappeared. Only countless fine ashes fell along with the rain, incomparably gentle, incomparably sentimental, as if it was the final farewell. She didn't have time to say anything to him. She didn't say anything. Tribulation's body fell to the ground. He reached out his trembling hand, trying to touch the ashes in the air. The cherry blossoms fell in front of him, covering everything. His trembling eyes and trembling hands gradually became stable. Tribulation watched quietly. Time seemed to pass in a flash, but also like 1,000 years. In the near-eternal haste, the warmth gradually began to disappear. The sky over the cherry blossoms dimmed silently. The last cherry blossom fell in front of him, fell, and disappeared, leaving no trace. Tribulation was motionless, silent as a statue. The world was empty. All the warmth in his heart began to disappear with the falling cherry blossoms, leaving no trace. Far and near, countless saint warriors began to gather and rush over. Tribulation moved his body. The whole world, the whole world, the whole city. There was no more concern in front of him, only the enemy. Tribulation's body trembled. He laughed miserably. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 578. He laughed bitterly without making a sound. Tribulation raised his head. The cold mask covered his face, suppressing all his emotions and holding them in his heart. A faint wetness flowed down the mask. It was extremely cold with the last hesitation and timidity. The thunder in the sky gradually faded away. The heavy rain that had covered Eastern Europe for several days and nights finally stopped. The world was silent. A depressing and strange atmosphere began to ferment and spread rapidly. Tribulation stood there, as if he had no consciousness. More and more saint warriors rushed into the church, but at the same time, they slowed down their pace. Figures began to gather and surround the church. Layers of saint warriors moved forward quietly, as if they were afraid of waking up something. Arcis had landed on the ground at some point. His body was quietly tense. He looked at Tribulation without speaking or making a move. At this moment, the rising momentum of Tribulation had completely disappeared. He was standing there, but it was like a touch of darkness that could be seen everywhere in the night sky. It was natural, as if he did not exist at all. Arcis's reason wanted him to take action directly, but his inner intuition kept urging him to retreat. The faintly discernible danger quietly surrounded the whole church, and the source of the danger was Tribulation, who was in a daze. The sun and darkness coexisted in the sky. Reality and illusion seemed to have completely merged together. The temperature was so cold. Standing here, Tribulation could clearly smell the fragrance of flowers from North Island. The cherry blossoms fell, and Angel's figure completely disappeared. Tribulation reached out in vain, as if he wanted to catch the floating ash in the air. But the night sky after the rain was clear and cold. The world seemed transparent and so fragile that it made people desperate. There was nothing left. After all, there was nothing left. The past came like a tide and went away with the wind. Tribulation had thought of many possibilities and fantasized about charging many times. The two young men and women, who had met for a short time but had made their souls intertwine, met again. They either loved each other and killed each other with a clear distinction between life and death, or told each other affectionately, or had no choice in Jianghu, or these fantasies had appeared in Tribulation's mind again and again. However, as time passed year by year, in the long time that could almost make people let go of everything, they had never seen each other again. Until this year, until tonight, there was no clear distinction between life and death, no affection and no helplessness. The man and woman who missed each other didn't even have time to say a word after many years of separation. Just a glance. Life and death had so cruelly separated them into two different worlds. Tribulation's heart was completely empty, and there was only despair. "I can't take you anymore." Tribulation's voice was erratic and weak. As the night breeze blew past, it seemed to carry the floating ashes with it. Tribulation took off his mask. The mask, which was mixed with many special alloys, turned into dust in his hands. His face was deathly pale and lifeless, carrying countless joys and sorrows. It was extremely miserable. He slowly turned around and looked at Arsis. Why? At this moment, Arsis almost instinctively wanted to turn around and escape. The malice and danger that had always lingered in the night almost turned into a substance and shrouded him. The murderous intent that filled the sky seemed to be emitting a wild laughter filled with the smell of blood. It was like a nightmarish strangeness and coldness that entangled him crazily. Tribulation's eyes were dark, but Arsis saw countless life and death in his eyes. There was sunlight, darkness, cherry blossoms, and the sea in those eyes. In the end, they became dark and empty. Tribulation didn't realize that he had changed. All the changes had long been meaningless. He wanted to become stronger just because he wanted to enter the Holy Land and bring his woman out of the most heavily guarded place in the world. Now he might have been able to do this, but the woman he wanted to bring back had become a handful of ashes in the air. All the reality had become an illusion. Tribulation tilted his head. Tilting his head, he looked at Arsis and said softly, "Speak." His voice was so weak, so weak. Arsis suddenly took a step back and roared, "Heretic, this is what you deserve." He raised his arm and suddenly said, "Kill! Kill him." The saint warriors surrounding Tribulation were getting closer and closer. With Arisis's roar, countless saint warriors suddenly roared and rushed directly to Tribulation. Lightning, raging fire, icicles all over the sky, and cold wind whistled at the same time. Tribulation's figure was distorted. There was no shadow around. His whole person had completely turned into a shadow. Tribulation's arms, legs, and head were all twisting, becoming invisible and intangible. The extremely dense darkness roared with death. There was a bloody light in the darkness. All the raging fire and lightning disappeared completely in an instant. Amidst the extreme silence, death sneered as it covered life. Blood fell like heavy rain. Pieces of flesh and blood flew high into the sky. There was only flesh and blood. The darkness roared for only a moment, but the flesh and broken bones that had been cut off had already fallen in the air. The large pieces of flesh and blood were so dense that people couldn't even tell which part it was. The black shadow passed through the dead crowd and appeared in front of Arsis. Then it came behind him. This black shadow appeared in Arisis's consciousness. The sharp pain had suddenly spread all over his body from his back. Blood burst out behind him. An ordinary short knife had cut open his skin and torn a large piece of flesh and blood. Arsis opened his mouth, but before he could roar, his chest had already collapsed under the tremendous force. The roar turned into a spurt of blood, and the extremely blurred and distorted figure dragged his body and smashed it into the ruins on the ground. The whole ground shook with a loud bang, and countless smoke and dust rose. The black shadow kept changing. It didn't dodge but attacked all the way. Unimaginable power with absolute explosive force fell on Arsis at the same time. Countless saint warriors were still charging forward. At the moment of the loud noise, they subconsciously turned their heads. Before the sound in that direction had died away, Arsis had been hit in another direction. Arisis's mind was completely blank. At this moment, he finally confirmed that it was not because Tribulation's body had turned into a ghost and could completely twist. It was because it was fast. Tribulation was too fast. This kind of speed had completely exceeded the reaction speed of the human body in an instant. Arsis wanted to fight back, but countless attacks fell on him, and he couldn't realize what the other party was doing. Because he couldn't see clearly. Countless attacks broke out at the same time. Arisis's physical injuries continued to worsen, but he just couldn't see what Tribulation was doing. It wasn't until this moment that Arsis felt panic in his heart. Tribulation was an assassin. To some extent, Rothschild's martial arts were also inclined to this kind of speed and explosive assassin's way. As an old enemy, Arsis was completely an expert in dealing with this kind of opponent. He had fought with Paul of Rothschild, and Paul's combat capability was already at the peak of the invincible realm in King Tong's domain. But Paul in that state was completely inferior to the current Tribulation. He was far inferior. If it was a competition between the so-called top assassins, even if Paul stood in King Tong's domain, It would be difficult for him to hold on for 10 seconds in front of the current tribulation. This was no longer the peak of the invincible realm. In the whole dark world, no one knew that after Wang Tianzong, it was not deity of the purgatory of heaven capital, Lin Fengting or Li Tianlan, who was most likely to become the chosen one, who had crossed the threshold of the peak of the invincible realm. It was tribulation. Half step to the chosen one. The black shadow was howling fiercely. The darkness kept surging. Arisus's huge body was completely in tribulation's belt. He kept moving. He didn't dodge. There was no way to dodge. He was being beaten, and he could only be beaten. Countless forces were surging and attacking his body. At this moment, the speed at which his body was sent flying by tribulation had almost exceeded the speed at which he burst out with all his strength at his peak. The ruins of the whole church kept shaking. The solid statue, the collapsed hall, the thick pillars, the messy crowd, and the attacks were everywhere. Wherever the black shadow passed, anything that stood in front of him was directly smashed in an instant. Blood sprayed all the way. Arisus's consciousness finally made him let out a roar, but the roar was instantly drowned out. It became weak and miserable. The strongest domain of the invincible realm of the church seemed to appear for a moment, and then it was broken in an instant. The crowded crowd of saint warriors was affected by the one-sided battle and instantly turned into blood and minced meat all over the ground. Thick blood fell from the air, with a mass of blurred flesh and blood. One of Arisus's eyeballs was dug out by tribulation and thrown to the ground. But when the scream rang out, Arisus's figure had already appeared in another direction. There was no mighty change in the sky and earth when the experts at the peak of the invincible realm fought. There was only an unimaginably fast speed and strength. No one knew if Arisus was fighting, and no one was even sure if he had fought back. The so-called domain, the so-called power, and the so-called number one in close combat in the world were completely crushed in front of the black shadow. Only blood kept flying out, and the screams were continuous. Countless saint warriors crowded uneasily, and finally stopped in the increasingly miserable and frightened screams. Everyone had a blank look on their faces. It seemed that no one had ever thought that Saint War Angel Arisus, who had supported the development of the Vatican for many years, would be treated like this one day. Fighting? This was a complete torture. Arisus finally gave up the intention of fighting back and began to run away with all his strength. He didn't even care about what was in front of him and behind him. He was running like a headless shadow. The black shadow had always been around him. Blood fell from the air. In the scream from high to weak, thick fingers with blood fell to the ground. Hair, eyeballs, teeth, and arms. One by one, the parts were thrown down from the air. The saint warriors in the last row had begun to retreat quietly. Rip! There seemed to be the sound of rags being torn. Arisus's screams had become extremely hoarse. An extremely tall but bloody red figure fell to the ground. As soon as his figure fell to the ground, it began to bounce on the ground. The twisted black shadow gradually became clear. He seemed to be carrying a bag in his hand. All the saint warriors took a step back at the same time. Everyone looked at Tribulation with endless fear in their eyes. The bloody figure fell at Tribulation's feet and kept twitching. No one could tell that it was the once arrogant Saint War Angel. In everyone's eyes, it was just a bloody monster. The real Saint War Angel was being held in Tribulation's hand. Countless drops of blood fell from his hand. It was a piece of human skin. The human skin that belonged to Arisus. Tribulation reached out his hand. The cold wind was like a knife, condensing in his palm. The cold and sharp blade fell on Arisus's body and began to cut off every inch of his flesh and blood little by little. Arisus's screams were extremely hoarse, but his body kept trembling under the severe pain. Tribulation threw the human skin in his hand to the ground. The blade condensed by the cold wind tortured Arisus's body bit by bit in an extremely cruel and cold-blooded way. Tribulation cried out, like a loser who had lost his whole life. He looked at the saint warriors in front of him, trembling and crying. Go to hell. Apex. Chapter 579. The wind and rain that had ravaged Eastern Europe for several days finally stopped. Reki City looked more and more desolate. The night had not yet dissipated. In the dim night, the city without wind and rain was quiet. The cold came down without warning with the disappearance of the wind and rain. There was no spring and autumn in the far north. After the midsummer, above 0 degrees Celsius, it was winter. The banquet in the Manlisai Hotel continued. That night, dozens of wealthy families in Eastern Europe gathered here. Behind the huge transfer of interests represented the changes of the situation. This was an incomparably huge stage. Everyone was dancing on the stage, looking for their own position. But in Li Tianlan's eyes, the whole general trend seemed to be moving away from Reki City with the wind and rain, getting farther and farther away. There seemed to be an invisible force pushing the general trend away from Reki City, which meant that too many future banquets were no longer the core of Eastern Europe. The situation began to shift to a direction that no one could predict. The general trend changed. The invisible force kept pulling, and the general trend was constantly broken. It began to scatter toward the small city in the north near the polar region. The car approached the Manlisai Hotel. In a short time, Li Tianlan's heart had completely calmed down. Tribulation was not in the parade square, but went to Mormons. The news came from Situ Xianxia, so Li Tianlan could not doubt it at all. It didn't matter why tribulation went to Mormons and how Situ Xianxia got the news. What mattered was that tribulation had gone to that small city. Qin Weibai was also on the way to Mormons. In the plan of Samsara Palace, Mormons was the end of everything. Li Tianlan didn't know what would happen there, but since he had made a decision, all the anxiety and worry began to disappear from his heart. He drove, and there was only cold reason and calmness left in his heart. The car drove past the front door of the Manlisai Hotel. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and dialed Prime Minister Riker's number. His tone was low and flat. "Arrange a private plane. The sooner, the better. I'm going to Mormons." There was silence on the phone. Riker, who obeyed Li Tianlan's words, did not say a word. His rapid breathing came from the phone with anger and embarrassment. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Before he could speak, Riker's voice sounded. "Your Highness, I'm at the defense building. You'd better come in person." Li Tianlan frowned and hung up the phone. Thinking of Riker's subtle tone, he suddenly pressed the button. Throttle. The National Defense Building of Wulan State stood in the center of Reki City. When Li Tianlan arrived, he immediately found that all the signal lights around the National Defense Building had begun to operate. The NEET army had begun to set up defenses around the building intentionally or unintentionally, and the solemn atmosphere was overwhelming. At the main entrance of the National Defense Building, Riker's secretary was waiting. When he saw Li Tianlan coming, he hurriedly saluted and immediately took him upstairs. The interior of the National Defense Building was completely brightly lit. All the staff seemed to have returned to their posts late at night. Everyone was busy. The generals walked past him with serious expressions and discussed the battle plan. The staff officers were in a hurry. More people ran to the elevator with documents in their arms. The tense atmosphere surrounded Li Tianlan clearly, like a dark cloud of war. Li Tianlan frowned, looked at the secretary leading the way in front of him and asked, "What's going on?" "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." The secretary's face was pale. He said something vaguely. He was distracted and his words were in a mess. Li Tianlan vaguely heard words such as snow country, polar bear, war, and so on. Moreover, his Chinese was too stiff. Even with limited information, Li Tianlan found it extremely difficult to understand. The two quickly approached the elevator closest to the main entrance. Several staff officers saw Li Tianlan and gave way without hesitation. The elevator went all the way up and finally stopped outside the conference room on the 7th floor. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, walked out of the elevator, and directly pushed open the door of the conference room. The conference room was already crowded. Prime Minister Riker was standing at the front of the conference room, staring at the screen in front of him in silence. Several high-level officials of Wulan State, Tostel, the current patriarch of Rekvia, Qin Dongchao, the patriarch of the Qin clan, General of 9 Heavens of Zhongzhou State, Li Wangxing, Lin Yuxian, and Dongqing Rushi, who was a little confused and weak, all gathered in the conference room. Seeing Li Tianlan come in, everyone stood up. Before Li Tianlan could speak, Riker, who had been staring at the screen, turned around and said in a hoarse voice, "Your Highness, the real war has come." Li Tianlan, who had been mentally prepared, walked to the main seat and sat down. He said calmly, "What's the specific situation?" Riker glanced at Tostel. Tostel nodded, got up, and said, "A few hours ago, Tyrant, the former leader of the Polar Ground Alliance, appeared in the palace of Snow Country. In less than an hour, Snow Country began to declare war on all the dark forces in Eastern Europe. Tyrant was appointed as the chief marshal of the military of Snow Country. The branches of the Arctic Army have wiped out 6 small and medium-sized dark forces in the process of mobilization. At the same time, Snow Country blocked all airspace. Now look at their movements, whether it is the Arctic Army or the Bear Army, their destination is Mormons." Mormons. It was Mormons again. It was Mormons. Li Tianlan's heart was pounding. He nodded expressionlessly and said, "Go on." As soon as Tyrant's appointment was confirmed, Snow Country had held a temporary war conference among Eastern European countries. In the shortest time, more than 9 countries had made it clear that they were willing to advance and retreat with Snow Country to protect Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan suddenly sneered. Whose Eastern Europe is Eastern Europe? There were many countries in Eastern Europe, but in the capitalist world, everything belonged to capital, not people. And capital belonged to the wealthy families. Whose Eastern Europe was Eastern Europe? This is the root cause of the war. Qin Dongchao said slowly. He stood up, walked to the screen, and reached out to tap the screen. The map of Eastern Europe on the screen lit up, and the territories of each country appeared clearly in front of everyone. The map was completely red, as if the color of blood was flashing gently, with the smell of death. Your Highness, as you can see, now almost all of Eastern Europe is a battlefield. Many countries have stood in the camp of Snow Country and even attacked their own wealthy families. The wealthy families attending the banquet here tonight are the first targets of the camp of Snow Country. Now these wealthy families are fighting back with all their might, and countless small and medium-sized forces that have not yet withdrawn from Eastern Europe are involved. As we speak, the land of Eastern Europe, every country, and even every city is bleeding. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and stood up. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. He was expressionless. Reki City will not stand in the camp of Snow Country. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe are still stable for the time being. As for the Qin clan, Bayou State can also stabilize the situation, but it can only stabilize the situation. 9 countries have expressed that they are in the camp of Snow Country. As for now, no one can say for sure if there will be more. But they have formed a military alliance in the fastest time and blocked the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. 40 minutes ago, 2 cruise planes of Wulan State were shot down over Kalin City. It is no exaggeration to say that now the planes of Wulan State and even the 5 countries in Eastern Europe can't fly out of the airspace of the 5 countries at all. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He glanced around the conference room and suddenly asked, "The key point is in Mormons?" "Yes, I have contacted the intelligence system of the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace. Although there is no definite evidence, it is almost certain that Snow Country has had in-depth cooperation with the Vatican. Now that Tyrant has returned, once he leads the Polar Ground Army to cooperate with the Holy Disarmament Corps led by Arcis of the Vatican, they can take over the Polar Ground Alliance again in the shortest time and gather most of the forces of the Polar Ground Alliance. At that time, they will have an army and a master. In terms of top combat power, they will have Tyrant and Arcis. This kind of strong force is enough for them to destroy all the dark forces in Snow Country. Lin Youxian's tone was calm. Li Tianlan looked at the map in front of him with cold eyes. Wipe out the interior of Snow Country and then march into Im? He asked suddenly. Dongqing Rushi frowned slightly and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Li Wangxing had already said directly, if these 2 forces cooperate, the Arctic Ocean Command can't stop them. Li Tianlan nodded. As soon as I was broken, all 5 countries in Eastern Europe would be exposed to the fangs of Snow Country and the Vatican. If Snow Country and the Vatican were allowed to enter the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, all the situations created by Xianxia state here would collapse. The signed agreements and huge profits would also turn into nothingness. Now all the wealthy families in Reki City would end up ruined. The influence of Xianxia state in Eastern Europe would completely disappear, and this land would be completely ruled by Snow Country. The most important thing was that this plan, which sounded crazy, was completely possible to succeed. After all, Snow Country was also one of the dominant countries in the world. As one of the most powerful superpowers in the world with the combination of elite troops, powerful armaments, a large number of masters and invincible realm experts, it was enough to overturn all situations. No one had expected that Snow Country, which had been extremely silent in the chaos of Eastern Europe, would suddenly launch a counterattack so fierce and abrupt. The good situation had become precarious under Snow Country's attack. Snow Country, Mormons, the Vatican, Xianxia muttered to himself and suddenly said, "Prepare the car. Let's go to Mormons." With the airspace blocked, the only way to go to Mormons was to drive. The ground was full of battlefields at this time. Lin Yuxian was stunned. Dongcheng Rushi opened her mouth. Li Wangxing and he looked at each other. Everyone had helplessness and bitter smiles on their faces. It was easy to find a car. But now that the Snowdance Corps was imprisoned by Wang Tianzong, where could they find people? Everyone was looking at Li Tianlan. In the face of the final counterattack and malice of all of Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan looked extremely calm and said lightly, "When has Xianxia state ever been afraid?" End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 580. In any war of any scale, having no one available was always the most awkward problem. The Snowdance Corps was full of experts. Li Tianlan originally had elite soldiers everywhere. But when the entire Snowdance Corps was frozen by Wang Tianzong's sword, Li Tianlan's biggest trump card was suddenly abolished. He was still a marshal, but he had lost his own troops. It was a distance of thousands of miles from Reki City to Mormons, and he had to pass through the borders of 6 countries along the way. When the whole of Eastern Europe became a battlefield, God knew how many enemies Li Tianlan would encounter. When there was no one available, he could not go there alone. Li Tianlan knocked on the table and glanced at Li Wangxing. Li Wangxing did not hesitate in the slightest. The Xuanwu of today was the lieutenant general of the 9 states. His position had become increasingly stable in recent years, but in his heart, the young master was still the young master. The Black Tortoise Terracotta Army is willing to follow young master. Li Wangxing smiled calmly. "Let's kill them together." Li Tianlan nodded. Before he could speak, another voice rang out. "The Vermilion Bird team is willing to fight with the marshal." Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. Codenamed Vermilion Bird, nodded slightly to Li Tianlan and said nothing more. "Thank you, General." Li Tianlan said seriously and sincerely. The Terracotta Army had a transcendent status in Xianxia state and did not belong to the Snowdance Corps. Although Yi was a general, his code name was Jiutian, so his status was not lower than that of a marshal. Under any circumstances, Li Tianlan could not directly give orders to Yi. Because of this, Yi stood up at this time. Such support was crucial. "You're welcome, Marshal." Yi shook his head. "Also, I can represent Azure Dragon here. The Azure Dragon team will follow us." Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat. Only then did he realize that he had overlooked this figure that he should not have ignored in any case. He narrowed his eyes and asked calmly, "Where is General Gongsun?" He glanced at him. His eyes were a little strange, but his answer was extremely calm. "Mormons." Li Tianlan's heart suddenly shook. The atmosphere in the conference room suddenly became a little subtle. The appearance of the tyrant, the movement of the polar bear army, the war in Eastern Europe. After the storm, the core of the entire Eastern Europe was converging toward Mormons. Now that Gongsun Qi was already in Mormons, did it mean, to some extent, that Xianxia state was not completely passive in this sudden chaos? "Marshal, there's something you said just now that I deeply agree with." Yi's tone was calm and steady. The current situation is indeed terrible and sudden. But have we, Zhongzhou State, ever been afraid? Li Tianlan suddenly clenched his fists and his eyes fell directly on Qin Dongqiao. Before he could speak, Qin Dongqiao said directly, "Time is short, and the number of people that the Qin clan can mobilize is limited. Your Highness, now the Qin clan can gather about 300 elites in Reki City. These people are now outside the city and can set off with your Highness at any time." Li Tianlan nodded. Beside Qin Dongqiao, Lin Yuxian raised his hand with a wry smile. "Tianlan, I can go with you, but only by myself. Do you understand?" Li Tianlan was confused. "According to my father, I shouldn't have been able to get close to Mormons. But my legs are with me and he is not there. Of course, I can go. But now I can't do anything to the Lin clan. To some extent, I am no longer the heir of the Lin clan for the time being, and I have no right to mobilize the resources of the Lin clan. This is the will of the new patriarch." He hesitated and still did not tell Li Tianlan who the new patriarch of the Lin clan was. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." She revealed her will. "She doesn't want you to go to Mormons." Li Tianlan looked at Lin Fengting and was silent for a long time. It was not until this moment that he vaguely understood something. Why did the gradually frozen relationship between the Qin clan and the Lin clan become harmonious? Why did the Qin clan spare no effort to help? He remembered several conversations with Qin Shilai. It was not until the news that the Lin clan had a new patriarch was confirmed by Lin Yuxian that he was thoughtful. The Samsara Palace had a close relationship with the Qin clan, and now it had cooperation with the Lin clan. Did the so-called new patriarch of the Lin clan come from the Samsara Palace? It was self-evident who was qualified to be the patriarch of the Lin clan in the Samsara Palace and did not want him to go to Mormons. He looked at Qin Dongqiao and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Is it her?" Qin Dongqiao subconsciously avoided Li Tianlan's gaze. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and smiled. "I have to go," he whispered as if he was muttering to himself, but the determination between the lines was so strong. The final battle was in Mormons. The Vatican, Snow Country, the Polar Ground Alliance. The Samsara Palace, the Lin clan. Even the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Terracotta Army, and even the Wang family of Beihai. Now they were all gathering in that direction. Li Tianlan was not sure what would happen there. But now Wang Tianzong was in Reki City. Once Tyrant and Arsis joined forces, the endless elites of Snow Country and fanatics would merge into one. Whether it was the Samsara Palace, the Lin clan, or the Purgatory of Heaven capital, they would all be in great trouble. Now the huge army swept across the whole of Eastern Europe, and the real torrent was gathering in Mormons. Once Tyrant and the Vatican broke through Mormons, the core of Zhongzhou State's interests in Eastern Europe, would be the first to bear the brunt, followed by the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. That was the real general trend, and it was unstoppable, because their army was endless. The general trend was advantageous. Going to the end was also a dead end. Li Tianlan and even all the interests of Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe were facing an unprecedented threat. This was the most violent counterattack of Snow Country. There was only one way in front of him. He had to fight and extinguish all the forces of Snow Country, or he would be attacked by Snow Country and everything on his side would be extinguished by Snow Country. This way was so clear. How could Li Tianlan not go? Everything he had in Eastern Europe. The people he cared about were in Mormons. The Lin clan was cooperating with the Samsara Palace. The Lin clan stood aloof from the world. The master of Samsara Palace said that she wanted to make an end with the Wang family of Beihai, but the entire Samsara Palace was already in a state of half-collapse. Even if all this was completely over, the Lin clan and the Samsara Palace would not get anything. But they were fighting desperately. For what? Or rather, for whom? Li Tianlan's brain suddenly became dizzy. As the world spun, his body swayed and he held the table in front of him. The great change was sudden. Everyone in the conference room stood up abruptly. Dongcheng Rushi appeared beside Li Tianlan immediately and frowned. "What's wrong?" "It's okay." Li Tianlan waved his hand. He was silent for a while, and then he laughed in a self-deprecating way. The great pain spread from his body with a clear feeling of tearing. His heart kept twitching. The emptiness of losing everything, accompanied by fear, occupied his consciousness. His face was a little pale. Li Tianlan finally realized what he had ignored, or what those emotions were that had been erased by an invisible force. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. That was reluctance. It was unforgettable reluctance. Li Tianlan, who had always felt that he was very sober, realized that he had indifferently let Qin Weibai and the master of Samsara Palace go to Mormons. When he knew that it was about to become the place of the final battle, he asked Qin Weibai and the master of Samsara Palace to go to Mormons. There was worry and uneasiness in his heart, but this emotion seemed so insignificant in his calm heart. It turned out that it was not insignificant, but that he had subconsciously ignored it. Hypnosis. Li Tianlan clenched his fists. His consciousness was perfect now, and it was impossible for him to be hypnotized. The only explanation was that the hypnosis this time, whether it was Qin Weibai or the master of Samsara Palace, could not have erased some of his emotions in the past few days. Not even in the past few years. The seed that had been planted in his spiritual world 3 years ago had only begun to sprout today, quietly and without a sound. Li Tianlan's body trembled slightly, and he slowly straightened his body. All the weakness and fear completely disappeared in his heart. In an instant, the awe-inspiring sword intent began to surge in the conference room. Li Tianlan stood up and walked to the screen. The map of Eastern Europe was enlarged in front of him. He reached out and drew a line on the screen. Starting from Reki City, he rushed out of Wulan State, out of Ross State, out of Oga State, through Im, all the way to the Longji border, through the hinterland of the Eisen Federation, into Snow Country, and straight to Mormons. This meant a journey of thousands of miles in reality. At this time, no one knew how many war zones and battlefields there were. Li Tianlan drew it little by little, and it was a straight line. At all costs. In the power and sword intent that filled the conference room, everyone felt crazy. Your Highness, Snow Country is not to be trifled with. Rieker stood up and said seriously. Snow Country was not to be trifled with. This was an international consensus. The country with the largest territory in the world would rather have its own economic order close to collapse in order to maintain its extremely powerful military strength. To a certain extent, it could even be said to be a model of militarism. Now that Snow Country had declared war on all the dark forces, it was enough to prove their strength. This was no longer a conflict in the dark world. This was a war. And Snow Country was one of the countries with the strongest war power and war potential in the world. I know. Li Tianlan looked at the map in front of him. Everyone knows that Snow Country is not to be trifled with. But after so many years, it seems that many people have forgotten that the Li family is not to be trifled with. He stared deeply at the map of Eastern Europe in front of him, his eyes sharp and ferocious. Eastern Europe. This land, which had been trampled by the Li family in the past, seemed to have forgotten the sharpness of the Li family and the awe they should have. He stared at the vast territory of Snow Country, and his whole mind had flown to Mormons. His real reluctance and future were there. The Snowdance Corps was imprisoned by a sword. So he was no longer a marshal. But Li Tianlan was still Li Tianlan. Today, he had Li Wangxing, Lin Yuxian, and the elites of the Qin clan by his side. Even if he had nothing by his side and was alone, he still had confidence in himself. He dared to fight his way through alone. In troubled times, Zhongzhou State was not afraid. When had the Li family ever been afraid of anything? He slowly turned around and said calmly, "Let's go." End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 581. It was afternoon in Yuzhou when they received the battle report from Eastern Europe. The atmosphere in the Bai family's manor was harmonious. Bai Qingxian came to Yuzhou from Guangdong to attend a meeting held by the cabinet, while Dongqing Qiuqi went to Yuzhou to talk about a project. Dongqing Wudi did not go to the army headquarters. Instead, he came to the Bai family's manor with Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters. Dongqing Hongguang had left Lin An, but he did not return to Zhongyuan. Instead, he was a guest in the Bai family. This was a rare scene over the years. The giant group had always been a little loose. In recent years, as the leaders of the giant group, although the Bai family and the Dongqing clan could still maintain the same general direction, the cracks in private had become more and more obvious. It was all mediated by the Zhou family. The root cause of the gradual alienation of the two families was nothing more than the worsening relationship between Bai Qingqian and Dongqing Wudi. But recently, the relationship between Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian had gradually warmed up. In addition, Dongqing Wudi held a post in Yuzhou. The relationship between the two families began to gradually ease, and they visited each other more frequently. Dongqing Qiuqi and her mother were making dumplings in the kitchen. In the living room, Bai Zhanfang, Bai Qingzhao, Dongqing Hongguang, and Dongqing Wudi were chatting. All four of them were big shots who were qualified to see the top secrets of Zhongzhou State. The topic also revolved around Eastern Europe, so the atmosphere of the conversation was as serious as a meeting of the army headquarters. Near dinner time, Bai Zhanfang took the initiative to mention the engagement between Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi. After the war, the news that Li Tianlan did not take care of the Snowdance Corps but took Dongqing Rushi to get a room had now spread widely among the upper class of Zhongzhou State. Countless people reprimanded it as absurd. But specifically, inside the Dongqing clan, everyone was smiling, and the engagement had begun to be put on the agenda. Recently, there had been a lot of internal turmoil in the Dongqing clan. The fact that Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi were together could be said to be the only good news, so Dongqing Wudi discussed it with great interest. On impulse, he even decided to marry Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi as soon as they came back from Eastern Europe. In the happy atmosphere, Lieutenant General Cheng Huaining, commander of the Arctic Ocean Command, directly called Dongqing Wudi's cell phone. Without any courtesy, the first sentence made the smile on Dongqing Wudi's face disappear. "Marshal, the war has broken out." Countless gunshots rang from the phone. The roar of explosions was continuous, and Cheng Huaining's voice was intermittent. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes. At this moment, he, who had been smiling, had become a little strange to everyone, including Dongqing Hongguang. He slowly stood up and looked out the window. It was already dusk outside the window. The afterglow of the setting sun illuminated the sky, and the white clouds in the sky seemed to be burning. The setting sun was like blood. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, "Where are you?" "Eastern Europe, battlefield." The signal seemed to be jammed, and intermittent messages kept coming. "Arctic Ocean, 6 bases, like Snow Country. His Highness Stone. Snowdance Corps is imprisoned." Dongqing Wudi listened quietly and tried to distinguish the information. Cheng Huaining didn't say a word of nonsense, but all the information was incomplete. "You don't have enough men? The command is enough. Your Highness Don, there's no one." The rumbling became more and more obvious. Dongqing Wudi held the phone and was silent for a long time. If the Arctic Ocean Command had enough manpower, Tianlan didn't have anyone available? What did it mean that the Snowdance Corps was imprisoned? The situation in Reki City had been settled. How could the war have anything to do with Snow Country? Cheng Huaining's call was cut off. The phone rang again. Dongqing Wudi glanced at the phone and immediately connected it. "Mr. President." "Wudi, something happened in Eastern Europe." Li Huaqing's voice was low. "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." Although he still sounded calm, the anger in his tone was extremely obvious. Before Dongqing Wudi could speak, he had already said directly, "The Heavenly Sword has imprisoned the entire Snowdance Corps in the parade square. Tyrant has returned and officially joined Snow Country. Now there are battlefields everywhere in Eastern Europe." Snow Country mobilized nearly hundreds of thousands of troops overnight. The most elite polar bear was led by Tyrant to Mormons, and other troops began to expel all hostile forces. Tianlan set off for Mormons half an hour ago. There were less than 500 people around him. The special mobile phone was crushed by Dongqing Wudi in an instant. Dongqing Wudi's expressionless face was already livid. No one could have imagined that Eastern Europe, which had been settled, would be in such chaos overnight. The Arctic Ocean Command was under attack. The Polar Bear Army went straight to Mormons. Hundreds of thousands of troops of Snow Country wreaked havoc in Eastern Europe, and there was smoke everywhere. Under such circumstances, would Li Tianlan fight to Mormons with only a few hundred people? But when the Snowdance Corps was frozen, it was not bad for Li Tianlan to gather hundreds of people. The Arctic Ocean Command had no time to care about other things. Even if Cheng Huaining still had the strength to spare, he did not dare to support Li Tianlan at this time. It was not that he could not, but that he did not dare. After all, he was parachuted in and did not have a good control over the more than 100,000 troops of the Arctic Ocean Command. More than a month could not even let him sort out the internal relations. In his view, the Arctic Ocean Command could be said to be the direct line of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong froze the Snowdance Corps with a sword. At this time, how could Cheng Huaining dare to transfer the military power of the Arctic Ocean Command to Li Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath. His unusual movements had attracted everyone's attention. The living room became solemn. Finally, Dongqing Wudi held out his hand to Bai Qingzhao. Mobile phone. Bai Qingzhao handed the mobile phone to Dongqing Wudi and said, "What's the matter?" Dongqing Wudi lowered his head and dialed Li Huaqing's phone again. He said calmly, "Prepare a military plane to Liaodong. In addition, inform the 4 headquarters to hold a meeting. Send the order for all the Black Army of the Border Control Corps to be ready for battle." He looked at his watch and said lightly, "In 3 hours, we will march into Snow Country." Dongqing Hongguang suddenly stood up. "Wudi, what's going on?" "There are changes in Eastern Europe." Dongqing Wudi rubbed his temples. "I don't know a lot of things for the time being, but Tyrant returned and Snow Country began to be restless. Now the whole of Eastern Europe has become a battlefield. The specific news should come back soon. Dad, time is running out. I'll go to the headquarters of the Black Dragon Army first." He paused and continued, "Don't worry, Zhongzhou State is fine, and so is Tianlan. Nothing will happen." Snow Country? Dongqing Hongguang's eyes were a little cold. Dongqing Wudi suddenly sneered. "It's no big deal. The Arctic Army and the Bear Army? 10 years ago, 30,000 elites were chased by 3,000 people of my Thunderbolt Battalion for nearly 600 miles and even lost their flag? How can they be called elites?" Boundless murderous aura surged out of him. Dongqing Wudi's eyes turned blood red. He got up and walked out of the door, saying calmly, "I'm going to destroy Snow Country." Reki City, Parade Square. Tens of thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were still motionless. In front of Li Huaqing, Wang Tianzong, who was condensed by sword energy, had quietly disappeared. Li Huaqing's expression gradually became cold. As soon as the news of the chaos in Eastern Europe reached his ears, he did not rush to the defense building of Wulan State, because he knew it was meaningless. In fact, he came to Wulan State as a symbol, and the real influential person was Li Tianlan. So Li Huaqing stayed here, hoping to influence Wang Tian. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Indulgence. But now it seemed that all his efforts had completely failed. "Is the current situation also in your plan?" Li Huaqing asked in a cold tone through the huge and vague sword intent. The next second, Wang Tianzong's voice sounded from afar, extremely clear. "Yes. What on earth do you want?" Li Huaqing frowned. "I've already said it." Wang Tianzong's voice was quiet, without any fluctuation. "I want the whole of Eastern Europe." Li Huaqing sneered. "Can you get it? Is the current situation in your plan?" "Tianzong, you're too confident. No one can control everything. In such a situation, even if you control Tyrant and even the president of Snow Country, what can you do? Snow Country has hundreds of thousands of troops, and other countries have countless troops. They are fighting everywhere. No one has a way to retreat. Who else can you control? Who is willing to listen to you? Don't worry." Wang Tianzong said blandly, "After today, everything should be over." "You can't win." Li Huaqing roared. How many people can the Wang family of Beihai have? Do you want to move the entire Beihai core to Eastern Europe? Not only can you not take down Eastern Europe, but you may even ruin everything in front of you. Tianzong, it's still not too late. The 10,000 people in front of you still have a chance to reverse the situation. They can only stay here. Wang Tianzong's voice was firm and indifferent. President, these are the most elite troops of Zhongzhou State. They can participate in any battlefield, but they shouldn't die in vain in this situation tonight. I'm responsible for Zhongzhou State by keeping them here. He paused and continued, as for the Wang family of Beihai, the main reason why the Wang family of Beihai has always been able to dominate the dark world is not how many people we have, but because we have swords. Vaguely he laughed. My sword is coming. I can feel it. You have swords, Li Huaqing said in an absurd tone. If you have swords, can you compete with the whole of Snow Country and even the whole of Eastern Europe? Wang Tianzong did not answer this question. She was silent for a while and calmly said, Here, Snow Country is not the only country that will declare war. Almost at the same time as Wang Tianzong said this. With Snow Country as the center, the same news spread to all corners of Eastern Europe almost at the same time through countless channels. The Wang family of Beihai, which had been operating in Eastern Europe for many years, almost used all its trump cards at once. Countless news spread quickly. Within Snow Country, a large number of killings started without warning. It belonged to the Wang family of Beihai. After a long silence, the will belonging to the Sword Emperor began to wreak havoc throughout Eastern Europe unscrupulously. Everyone received the news. That was the official notice belonging to the Wang family of Beihai. If you want to take Eastern Europe, every country and city in Eastern Europe, mountains, rivers, grass, trees, senior officials, and people will be under the sword of Beihai. In the palace of Snow Country. The president of Snow Country, who had just finished the meeting, looked at the notice that appeared silently on his desk and was silent for a long time. A general who was ready to lead the army to set off after the tyrant looked angry and ferocious. Mr. President, what is this? The president of Snow Country was silent. After a long time, he said faintly, Isn't it obvious? This is a notice. A notice was the weakest thing, but it was also the most powerful thing. A country and a city, mountains, rivers, grass, trees, senior officials, and people. They were all under the sword of Beihai. There was no threat, no advice. This notice was placed here, like the sharpest sword, suppressing all of Eastern Europe. Under the sword, there were always only two choices. Surrender or death. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easy reading. Chapter 582. The darkest part of the polar night was also the time when the killing was the fiercest. The entire Mormons had completely turned into hell. The endless murderous intent pushed blood and death to every corner of the city. The almost crazy killing intent continued to condense. It seemed to have undergone a qualitative change, as if it had condensed the heaven and earth. When the thick killing intent of the night swept over the castle, Deity woke up from his meditation and looked out of the window. It was still night outside the window. In the darkness of the night, the chaotic screams seemed to have lost their minds. The mournful cries of people in the midst of true despair brought with them an unreal sense of fear. The killing intent that almost tore the heaven and earth flashed away. Countless screams stopped and then disappeared completely. The surroundings were quiet for a moment. Not far away, chaotic explosions sounded. The roaring and messy gunshots lingered in the whole city, as if it were the end of the world. Deity's eyes gradually became clear. There seemed to be a setting sun in his calm eyes, which was extremely real. Deity's body moved, and the aura that had been restrained to the extreme began to recover slowly. An extremely loud heartbeat suddenly sounded around the castle. Even though it was already very far away, the killing intent in the distance still paused slightly, and then it became more and more frenzied. Deity looked into the distance and felt the killing intent. His eyes were solemn and he was silent. That aura was so violent. He had never seen such a strong killing intent in his life. It was crazy, frenzied, cold-blooded, and brutal, with a strong tendency to self-destruct. The final battle was coming. When did such a person appear in Mormons? Or, when did such a person appear in the dark world? Deity's eyes became bright. His body was trembling and he seemed more and more real. A figure appeared in front of the door and paused. Deity turned his head slightly. "Come in." The handsome and almost demonic figure walked in and bowed slightly. "Your Highness." Deity narrowed his eyes and seemed to be a little surprised. Then he waved his hand. "Sit down. When did you come back?" It was not Daybreak who came in. It was Dawn, who had rarely appeared around Deity since he came to Eastern Europe. "I just arrived." It seemed that because he was nervous, there was no expression on Dawn's face. What he wanted to report had nothing to do with tonight, but the sudden news was still too shocking. So as soon as he sat down, he couldn't wait to say, "Your Highness, our sis has died." This news was earth-shattering to anyone. Deity's hand that was pouring the tea suddenly trembled, and the warm water splashed out. With an unconcealable strangeness, he asked, "You mean our sis?" Dawn smiled bitterly. When he first received the news, he also thought that he had misheard, but the battle happened in Mormons. Under special circumstances, it was extremely easy for them to obtain evidence. The evidence was conclusive. Even if this news was unbelievable, it was the truth. God was silent for a long time. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, his voice slowly rang out, "How is the Pope?" He did not ask who had done it. This question was important, but not as important as the Pope's condition. Aries. Pope. One of the two pillars that supported the Vatican to stand at the peak of the world had completely collapsed. What would happen to the other one was something that all the bigwigs in the dark world were concerned about. The Pope is missing. In fact, the one outside should be chasing after the Pope. There was excitement and fear in Dawn's voice. Nearly 3,000 saint warriors, the most elite 3,000 saint warriors of the Vatican, are now less than 500. The dead, his voice was a little trembling. None of the corpses are intact. Deity quietly drank a cup of tea. That little guy, he recalled and seemed to have a lot to say. Finally, he shook his head. Angel is dead. He was not asking but affirming. "Your Highness, do you know who the other party is?" Dawn was a little curious. "Of course." Deity's tone seemed to be a bit complicated. "The little guy who killed our sis tonight was introduced to martial arts by me. I was very optimistic about him at the beginning. I even valued him more than I did you and Daybreak. He had the chance to join us, but young people?" He shook his head in self-mockery and muttered to himself. When the Vatican wanted to establish the East Asia Diocese, Holy Virgin Angel went to East Island to avoid the internal disputes of the Vatican. I arranged for her to meet tribulation, but the subsequent development was beyond my expectation. They developed too slowly and too fast. I made a lot of preparations, but before I had time to take action, he went to the old man. If not, today would probably be a different ending. Dawn looked at Deity and was stunned for a long time. Then he shook his head with a wry smile. "I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it. You thought I completely gave up Psi City?" Deity looked at Dawn with a smile, and his eyes were a little melancholy. At this moment, no one knew if he thought of the man in white who stood on the top of Mount Taibai all year round. "I never gave up, but I really couldn't get it. Over the years, I've been trying to get Psi City back, but I fought with the old man several times, and the whole Psi City was pulled over by him little by little. There's no way, really no way. There's still a chance." Dawn hesitated. "Her Highness Hidden God is now in Eastern Europe. After such a long time, she may have noticed your identity. Why not?" Deity slowly poured himself a cup of tea. He thought about it seriously for a long time, and then said blandly, "I don't dare." Dawn froze for a moment. Deity did not explain the reason. He just thought of the meeting with the old man in Lin, and before he came to Eastern Europe. He left Phoenix with the old man. When he left, the old man whom he wanted to live forever in the first half of his life and hoped to die 1,000 times in the second half of his life said, "You will fall to the ground." This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. One place. Twice. The first time he fell, he was almost doomed. He fell in the hands of a woman. The same place, twice. He was not sure if it was Situ Tsangyo, but ambitious people were suspicious. Deity did not dare to move. In the end, he could only stay still. He got up, walked to the window, and looked at the distant sky. The killing intent in the distant sky continued to condense, tearing heaven and earth. The wind and rain had stopped. Some starlight appeared in the clear night. The starlight gradually lit up, and there were more and more. The killing intent became more and more intense and kept rising, as if it wanted to transform again. This was the killing intent and aura belonging to the half-step chosen one. But this killing intent seemed to have no end. It was constantly rising, almost crazily. It's close to the real supreme. Deity whispered to himself, amazing talent. Unfortunately, it's the end of the road. He held the teacup and looked down at the tea in the cup. The tea was rippling. Deity's voice was complicated and lost. This time, it's really the end of the road. Your Highness, you. Dawn felt that Deity's aura had become a little different from the past and hesitated a little. Deity waved his hand with flagging interest. He looked at Dawn and asked, how's the thing I asked you to investigate? Dawn was stunned, and his expression suddenly became serious. He and Daybreak followed Deity to Eastern Europe. Before the final battle, Dawn had another task. His task was very difficult, but in the chaos, it was not impossible. What he needed to do was to determine the whereabouts of people. But what he needed to determine was the whereabouts of experts of the invincible realm. It was not a certain expert of the invincible realm. It was the whereabouts of all the experts of the invincible realm in the Dark World more than 3 years ago. To be exact, it was the whereabouts of every expert of the invincible realm in the Dark World on the days of the final battle of Heaven Capital more than 3 years ago. Dawn naturally knew why, so he investigated very carefully. More than 3 years ago, a few days before the final battle of Heaven Capital, a young man named Huawu, who had never appeared in the eyes of any force in the Dark World, died. He was the son of Deity. For more than 3 years, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, headed by Dawn, had been investigating this matter carefully, looking for any clues. Huawu was just a teenager at that time, but Deity's martial arts had made great breakthroughs. The immortality seal could break the shackles of martial arts. At that time, the teenager, who was only 17 or 18 years old, had the strength of the thunder-shocking realm. His martial arts were extremely stable, and he had reached the limit of every realm. Dawn knew how terrifying Huawu was at that time. Although Huawu was not at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, he was no less than most of the half-step invincible realm experts. When they checked the scene afterward, all the signs showed that there seemed to be no power of the invincible realm involved in that battle. But the problem was that if there was no power of the invincible realm, the other party could not kill Huawu at all. If Huawu wanted to run, no one could stop him unless he was in the invincible realm. An absolute super genius died in East Island, which rose in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Deity had endured the anger in his heart for 3 years. Huawu definitely died under the power of an invincible realm expert. Now the chaos in East Island broke out. After the day of death and the trial day, all the invincible realm experts suffered heavy casualties, and all the superpowers were in chaos. Dawn found an opportunity and began to carefully investigate the whereabouts of every invincible realm expert from more than 3 years ago until today. Dawn was a little hesitant. Deity raised his eyelids. Speak. More than 3 years ago, during the final battle of Heaven Capital, Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, Jiang Qianyan, Chaos, Tianhai Wuji, and Lu Xingzangxuan were all in Huading. Dawn hesitated. According to my investigation, Tyrant was in Eastern Europe at that time, Jiang Qiansong did not leave South America, Charlemagne was active in Star State, and he seemed to be discussing cooperation with Cass Rotter. Arcis went to the border of Zhongzhou State, and King Tong and Paul were in the headquarters in England. In the extremely quiet night, Dawn's voice calmly told the whereabouts of the invincible realm experts more than 3 years ago. The divine list, the holy list. Most of the dozens of Invincible Realm experts now had accurate information. At some point, Dawn stopped. Deity drank tea silently and said blandly, "There are 2 more people. We can't confirm the whereabouts of these 2 people at present." Dawn said with a bitter smile, "One is the master of Samsara Palace." She didn't take action in Huading at that time. During that time, no one could determine her whereabouts. As for the other person, he hesitated and said cautiously, "It's Li Shi, the wife of the governor of Kunlun City. She was in East Island at that time, but we don't know where she was. At present, Li Shi is the most suspicious." Deity was motionless, as if he had turned into a statue. The master of Samsara Palace. These were the 2 most suspicious people at present. In the silence, Deity lit a cigarette and took a deep breath. "Do you know Saint?" he asked suddenly. "Saint of Samsara Palace?" Dawn was a little curious. After the final battle of Heaven Capital, Saint stayed in East Island and brought Li Tianlan, who was shot in the heart, back to Zhongzhou State. From then on, his identity was no longer a secret in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. "Wei Kunlun of Mount Shu?" "It's him," Deity said quietly. "In recent days, I suddenly thought of something related to Saint." Dawn was confused. She didn't know why God was talking about the saints at this time. Saint was one of the strongest superiors of the half-step Invincible Realm in the Dark World, which was the traditional combat capability of the Invincible Realm. But no matter what happened now, at least 3 years ago, Saint didn't really break through the Invincible Realm. Even if Huawu couldn't defeat Saint, he could at least escape. More than 3 years ago, at the last moment of the final battle of Heaven Capital, Deity's tone was low and hoarse, with a hint of coldness. "If this chapter is not finished, please turn the page. I've talked to Saint before." At that time, Saint and Daybreak talked about the master of Samsara Palace. Daybreak once said that after the battle with Gu Xingyun, even though the master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured, she still had the power to fight. God looked up into Dawn's eyes. "Do you know what the saint said?" Dawn's body trembled. At that time, the saint's unintentional answer might seem extremely cruel today. Deity laughed. At that time, Saint told Daybreak that the attack from the master of Samsara Palace had been used. "Pa!" He abruptly raised his hand and threw the teacup on the ground. With a crisp sound, God's body in the clear sound, Deity's body stood up. With the boundless shadow of death, he asked, "Where did she use it?" Dawn's eyes suddenly became extremely sharp. Was it the master of Samsara Palace who killed Huawu? Deity stood in silence for a while, then slowly said, "Li Shi won't attack Huawu. It's not necessary." He said quietly, "The master of Samsara Palace is the only candidate. But what I'm not sure now is which master of Samsara Palace killed Huawu." Dawn looked at Deity. After a while, he blinked and struggled to say, "What do you mean? Which master of Samsara Palace?" He rubbed his forehead. "Your Highness, do you mean that there is more than one master of Samsara Palace in Samsara Palace? What is the master of Samsara Palace?" Deity's tone was indifferent. "The identity is fake, or in Samsara Palace, the identity is meaningless. There may be more than one identity of the master of Samsara Palace, but there must be only one true supreme will." He was silent for a while and continued, "Some time ago, I received a message from Wang Tianzong. The message was very simple. He said that he found a woman named Qin Weiyun in the Qin clan. A few years ago, she was in danger when she was traveling in Europe. She was saved by the high-level officials of Samsara Palace and was recognized as his sworn sister." Dawn was a little confused. He suddenly felt that the story was a little familiar. "Do you still remember the origin of Qin Weibai?" Qin Weibai was in danger in Europe. She was saved by the master of Samsara Palace and was recognized as his sworn sister. Deity's tone was a little cold. "If this is a story, then in this story, Qin Weiyun is said to be Qin Weibai. If Qin Weiyun really exists, then where is Qin Weibai in this story?" Dawn was confused. He couldn't figure out the relationship for a while, but the general trend at present was extremely clear. He hesitated and said softly, Your Highness, at least we are still cooperating with Samsara Palace? Cooperation? Deity laughed. There is no cooperation. He said, I wasn't sure until not long ago that Qin Weibai involved me in the chaos and didn't intend to cooperate with me. Then what does she want to do? Dawn asked subconsciously. She wants to destroy this era. Deity's tone was cold. In our era, she wants to kill me, Wang Tianzong, and all the experts of the invincible realm. This, Dawn was tongue-tied. In fact, I don't care about face or not, but now, it's too late. Even if I know what Samsara Palace is thinking, it's too late. I can't leave, Deity said softly. He stretched out his hand and pointed to the city in front of him. This is Mormon's. The whole world is looking for the headquarters of Samsara Palace, but it's as ridiculous as looking for who the master of Samsara Palace is. Identity and headquarters, do they really mean anything to Samsara Palace? At the very least, I can be sure that all the power of the Samsara Palace is in Mormons. He reached out and pointed ahead. In the dark night ahead, there were many shadows of buildings. It was dark and extremely quiet. No one in the city looked around, no one made any sound, and there was no chaos at all. Daybreak stood behind Deity and looked at the quiet city. An indescribable coldness ran up his body and spread all over. The night ahead was getting thicker, and the killing intent was spreading. The darkness rushed over with infinite malice, like a raging tide, and instantly drowned the entire Mormons. Here, Dawn's voice was a little trembling. It looks like nothing has changed here. Deity's tone was calm, but there seemed to be an iceberg in his eyes. Even before I meditated, there were still people coming and going, but this city is different. His voice was low and calm. In the battle of the trial day, I borrowed Li Tianlan's sword energy, and Li Tianlan didn't hold back. His kendo was fully displayed in front of me, so I am now. Before the final battle, I was lucky enough to take a step forward and cross the half-step invincible realm. Before the ecstasy appeared on Dawn's face, Deity's voice had sounded like a nightmare. But guess what I saw in my meditation? He laughed softly, and his voice sounded like he was groaning. My sword chi domain expanded several times after my breakthrough, and it's now able to envelop an area of 10,000 meters. However, within 10,000 meters, in every street and every house, I only see killing intent. No matter men or women, there was only killing intent. The killing intent was all over the city. Only in this way can tribulation successfully break through to the present level with the help of the killing intent of the whole city. He turned to look at Dawn and said in a low voice, to be exact, there are no civilians in Mormons now. All the civilians have withdrawn. In this city, every household, except our own people, the rest are enemies. There may be people from other forces, but most of them should be from the Samsara Palace. Dawn looked out of the window subconsciously. It was as dark as ink outside the window, extremely depressing and cold. A city without civilians. Mormons was the place of the final battle. The whole city was a battlefield. A city without civilians. A city, an empty city full of enemies. It was also destined to be a place of blood and corpses. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.